Welcome to the June 5th meeting of the Thurston County Planning Commission. The Thurston County Planning Commission is a resident advisory board to the Board of County Commissioners on land use planning matters such as comprehensive plan and zoning ordinance amendments. Planning Commission actions are in the form of recommendations to the county commissioners, who are the final decision makers. All Planning Commission meetings are open to the public. Community members are welcome to observe all Planning Commission briefings and work sessions. We welcome public comment on those topics for which a public hearing has not been held. My name is Derek Day and I serve as the commission chair. I reside in District 1. And we will continue our introductions in the boardroom. Mr. Bartlett.
Hi there, my name is Colin Bartlett. I use he, him pronouns. I am representing District 5. I live in Tumwater.
Barry Halverson, District 2. Daniel Baumgartner, District 1.
Eric Casino, I serve at large and live in the Lacey UGA.
Joel Hanson, District 3.
Scott Nelson, District 4.
Sandy Kaiser, living in the beautiful District 3.
Joel Fishburne, I live in Rainier in District 4.
Evan Pestinger, I use he, him pronouns, District 5.
All right, well, thank you. So have folks had a chance to look at the agenda?
Move approval.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion on the agenda? All right, all in favor of the motion? Any opposed? All right, the motion passes. All right,
I'd be opposed to the link.
Yeah.
what's that mean?
Nothing terrible.
All right, have folks had a chance to look at our last meeting's minutes from May 15th?
Yes.
Let's move to approve.
Okay, we have a motion to approve those minutes. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, it's moved and seconded. Any discussion on the May 15th minutes?
The only comment I would have is they're really good. Thank you.
Few minor requests. Can we change and start changing going forward, the not in attendance excused to planned versus unplanned? Since that's our newly adopted rules of procedure. So that one I believe would be planned. Cool. And then second request on page 3, line 26. We just simply add 3 words to line 26. Commissioner Pestinger asked about the risk of speculation.
All right, any other changes to the minutes that we'd like to see?
Do we need to move to approve as amended?
I think we do.
Okay, move to approve as amended.
Second.
All right, any discussion on the new motion to approve as amended? All right, all in favor of approving the minutes as amended?
Aye.
Right. Okay, next on the agenda, we are moving to public comment. And I think today we will start here in the boardroom. And we've got 3 folks signed up to testify. We've got John Pettit, Christy White, and Betsy Norton. And we will go in that order. We have 3 minutes.
Chair Day, I think there might be a distinction between public comment
Oh,
for
okay.
our general meeting and for our public hearing.
That is correct. So, okay, so we'll start with the question first. Is there anybody who would like to make public comment not regarding the public hearing we're gonna be holding here in a little while? All right. Okay, we've got. You guys are doing great. One in the boardroom. So anybody else comment on issues not pertaining to our public hearing that's upcoming?
Nice to see you all.
Thanks for joining us. All right, you can go ahead. You go ahead and state your name for the record.
My name is Betsy Norton. I live in Olympia, and I'm just here representing myself this morning, this evening rather. I just wanted to comment on this one and say, I've been trying to compile recommendations for the comp plan as the draft chapters come out related to wildlife, habitat, and climate change. It's been an arduous and frustrating exercise because the number of changes made to the drafts, multiple sections of the plan that all these pieces are in, and the outside documents which are linked create just this huge bundle of information to read. And I was, so my request is that, if possible, if you can find a way to consolidate, provide a comprehensive index, or do some way to sort of cross-reference everything in the plan so that people can find the information they're looking for, I would really appreciate it. What concerns me when I was looking at the natural resources chapter is that it doesn't have a water component. And you know, I don't know from looking at the natural resources chapter, whether the innate conflict, I don't see anything about resolving the innate conflict between encouraging water intensive and water polluting industries on the one hand, and on the other hand, promoting water conservation, protection from contamination, and equitable distribution of water. Because we only see one side of that issue in that chapter. So I'm just kind of looking for a way that we can sort of understand what priorities are in there and where there are clearly conflicts of interest between the different chapters, if that can be sort of brought out in some way, so we can figure out what the actual vision and direction will be.
Thank you. All right, and any other, so right now we're just doing general public comment. If you're here to comment on the LRA, perfect. And go ahead and state your name for the record, and we'll have you fill this out later if you would.
Hi. My name is Sue Danver. And I live in the Alpine Hills area of Thurston County. And I wasn't planning on speaking tonight until about 3 hours ago. So please pardon my confusion if there is confusion. I'm commenting on both, well, mostly the chapter 2 chapter of the draft comprehensive plan. And I'm friends with Betsy and we talk a lot. Let's see. So I saw what she saw just this afternoon and it was rather confusing. And then I called on a group that I work with, Conservation Northwest, and they're the people planning a wildlife corridor from the Olympics to the Cascades, and we're a critical component of that. And I said, help, because I realized no one was going to be speaking on the wildlife corridor. And so, and they are the people that put in the snow quality pass area. And so what they did was, well, we'll send you the comp plan draft for the wildlife corridors for King County, because they're organized. So what I have provided you are segments to links of the King County connectivity program. And I see this is a great example of what I think Betsy wants. It's really cohesive, and the connectivity plan comes into 4 chapters. But basically it's in the environmental chapter. So I provided you the 4 places in the King County comp plan that deals with the wildlife corridor. The first one being the most important. Actually, I haven't read this because it's going so fast, okay? And then the second thing I have provided you is what is known as the priority. This is from a fish and wildlife person, state fish and wildlife. And it's the priority habitats and species list. And in that, they define diversity, they define corridor, they define priority habitat. And then they have a map of priority areas. So eventually, I will look at the exact language in our comp plan and provide a comment, maybe helping ease or facilitate your understanding how it could be in our comp plan. So lots going on this week, so.
Thank you, Sue.
Is that 3 minutes?
It is your 3 minutes.
So I can give you links, just as sort of sidebar. I can give you links and I have one more request. Because things are happening so fast in so many areas. I have a question. Can we comment further where you will listen to our comments seriously, or is this the last chance?
On the comp plan,
On the comp plan where you will adopt some of our stuff if you'd like it.
I think we'll be taking comment throughout, and then we provide some feedback to staff on some of the drafts.
Okay, because I hope this isn't the last time I can talk about this. Do you understand? And other things. Oh, I want to talk. Just 30 seconds more. I agree with comments you've gotten about the changing of the plan of the industrial land definition, the RRI. I agree with that. That's the change there requested. And the second one that comes with that. There's just one, I'm sorry. Can't find it. And the second one is the UGA swap matter, I think needs more definition, basically, and consideration. And I think you've had other comments about that from other people, so I'm supporting those comments.
All right, well, thank you, Sue.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
Just which is dovetailed into this, but I'm a little unclear as to what aside from our own comments, when people make formal recommendations, if for example, this group put together like a proposal for an addition to the comp plan or another group, what would that process look like? So I guess this is a question for the group that's triggered by this. Like, if they have further questions about something that we've already sort of discussed and passed through, but it's a substantive change that we might choose. How do we intend to address those? 'Cause I suspect we're gonna get a few of those.
Yeah, I think some of those, and somebody can stop me if they know better than me. But some of those comments could come to us and we could make recommendations to staff. I think some of those could probably come directly to staff. Is that also an option?
Pretty much anything that we receive relating to commenting on the comp plan will be in one of the Excel formats that you receive. So everything that we receive, you will receive as well.
And every public comment that comes before the planning commission does get forwarded to the Board of County Commissioners.
Okay, that was my understanding. I just wanted that stated out in the open for anyone else who had questions about that.
Yeah.
Are you taking these, Andrew?
I can.
And if you want links, I'll give you links.
Yes,
Thank
please email those forward.
Thank you.
So, and then I'll ask, is there anybody online who would like to make general public comment? We've got Miss Sepinen. And anybody else who would like to make public comment online, go ahead and raise your hand. And Tasha will go ahead and promote you to a panelist.
Did you call on me, I believe?
Yes, go for it.
I'm Loretta Sepinen. I live in Olympia, Washington. 3 minutes is quite a challenge. So I'm going to do bullet points on the land use chapter and a little bit more quick detail in the natural resources chapter. 3 bullet points in land use. The first 2 are the same as Sue just raised. That land swap, it's allowed under Senate Bill 5593, but we need interjurisdictional policy before we move ahead on this. We don't want to set precedent by making a one-off decision that's going to influence the future swaps. And so we need policy. We need a policy, we need to add a policy on industries that says we will only allow industries that are natural resource industries from now on. And I submitted some comments on how to write that. And then we need a policy around sustainable development that essentially says what the Sustainable Thurston talked to us about. In chapter 3, we are moving to protect ag land, but it's going slowly. 6 years ago, I came here to this very meeting and asked to take action on farmland loss, and the Planning Commission did. You got the CPA 16 on the docket, and as a result of that, one tool is moving forward, although no change has happened yet. It's now at the Board of County Commissioners. We haven't yet done anything to compensate landowners if we make that change. And after 6 years, land that's not prime farmland but doesn't have LTA protection gets 2 proposals, draft proposals, and they start with the word consider. 6 years, we've inched up to 2 proposals that say consider. We also have something else in the chapter, a new way to tally what is agricultural acreage. And it tallies to 64,000 acres, which is about what you get in multiple other ways of coming up with a number. However, there's much that we don't know, and we need to know it. We don't know what's under the hood. How do we get to this number? We don't know why. All we know is 2 data points, 2013 and 2024. And we don't know why those 2 data points tell us that we're gaining farmland. So finally, I want to thank the staff for writing policies and action statements. Very pleased with that. And for making the chapters really more readable for our residents. And I wanted you to take up more time than just this meeting because there's too much to talk about in these 2 chapters. I don't think you're going to get through it all just in this one meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Loretta. Anybody else online or in the boardroom who'd like to make public comment, general public comment?
Public comment being for the people who just came in.
Yes.
Specifically not about the special meeting.
Correct. We have, yeah, right now we're doing public comment. We have a public hearing here in a moment. But, all right. And with that, we will move on to continued business.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'd like to make a comment about our upcoming public comment. We have this topic that we're having a public hearing at 7 p.m. We received a public comment on May the 9th. It's passed out to us as part of this packet, which I believe, I guess I would like to ask staff, do we have any policy on public comment and limitations of public comment? I've heard a lot of things stated about hate speech. But I also, this one probably does not qualify for that, but probably qualifies for advocating violence, which I also think would be prohibited. But do we have a policy? I noticed it's not posted in our document here about public comment about saying you cannot say the following things. I know that's been an issue with meetings being bombed recently all over Pierce County and Western Washington. And so do we have a policy? Can we enforce it?
I am not aware of a policy as it relates to anything that's considered not violent or swearing, or outwardly aggressive towards like one specific person. But I can look into that. We haven't really had a topic like this where we get this kind of, and so this is kind of a new frontier for us. But we will look into it, obviously, because we will have another comment period when we get to the board stage. So it will be helpful to know that information, but I can look into that for you.
Yeah, from what I understand, most of the time reprehensible speech is still protected speech.
It's great.
This was vulgar.
It's a fine line. You can't scream fire in a crowded theater. That's lesson number 101 in Constitution, but
Usually it's a credible threat of violence is the threshold.
yeah. So I guess my bigger question is, there's been talk about this and other organizations, say the city of Lacey, city of Olympia, have had meetings and discussions about updating a policy or creating a unified policy across all of their groups meetings. Does the county have anything for BOCC or anywhere else?
There is probably a policy for the BOCC, but I'm not aware of a policy that kind of crosses all groups, but I will look into that as well.
Commissioner Pessinger, maybe I'm not following along very well. Are you concerned about the written comments that are coming in or people at the podium or both or?
This one on May 9th in writing is what I'm concerned about,
And you would, as they come in, you would prefer they not get disseminated or that they're edited or what are you suggesting should happen with those comments when they come in?
Yes.
Okay, fair, okay.
Yeah, so this is an appropriate 5 minute conversation. A lot of conversation, a lot of threats that end up affecting queer folks specifically start out as fears around or start out being phrased as protecting people against sexual predators. A lot of the language that I saw used in this is language that I have seen used against myself and other queer people. The difference that I'm seeing here is the difference between a category where you were talking about specific threats against specific people and then specific threats against categories of people. The fact that this particular category of people is one that is widely unsympathetic is less relevant to me. That I would like there to be a policy around directed threats at categories of people. And I do think that the appropriate method there would be essentially to be like return to center approach of like, hey, a little clippy that's like, hey, so I noticed that you advocated for the general castration of an entire group of people. What can we do about that? Yeah.
I think really the only thing to do is to ask staff if there is a policy that the county uses. That we might be able to provide. But in my recently refreshed OPMA training, it essentially told us to buck up, listen to the things we don't like to hear and ignore them. So that was essentially the advice. All right. Well, thank you for bringing it up. All right. With that, I think we will move on to continued business. We are on work session number 15 of Thurston 2045 in the Land Use Chapter 2 and Natural Resources Chapter 3. Whenever you're ready, Ashley.
Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. And I think we got about 5 minutes. But rather than diving into the presentation, were there any of the public comments that you might want me to address?
Mr. Pessinger?
Hi, Ashley. It was Sue Danvers who mentioned something about 64,000 acres and some calculations related to that. Is that accurate? And can you share any more details?
Yeah, I think those comments came from Loretta. And we have been doing a lot more monitoring of the extent of our agricultural lands here in the county as part of our voluntary stewardship program. So that is a program that has a separate advisory group. It's a work group that meets every other month. It's also a program where we are working very closely with our state partners because we have to do these monitoring reports every 2 years and then every 5 years. So as we've been going through that monitoring report and refining the methodology for agricultural activities extent, we basically updated the numbers in the comprehensive plan. So there is a written methodology Happy to share that. I think there is a reference to that report. But there's a whole memo just on the methodology that was used for that. So we can provide transparency. Any other questions on that one or other public comment pieces? I'm not hearing anything. Okay. Chair Day, do you want me to go ahead and start the presentation, even if it's only for 5 minutes?
Sure.
Okay. So we are going to try to cover 2 chapters today. This is by no means the last time that the public can comment on these chapters. We're trying to bring them to you as we have them as close to completion as possible. In this case, I would say land use is about 60% complete because we're missing all the housing pieces. The natural resources chapter is closer to 80% complete. And yeah, so open to feedback now, open to feedback, in the coming months, leading up to a public hearing probably in October. So what we are asking for tonight is, are we on the right track? We do have some bigger questions we're hoping to get planning commission feedback on, so that we can continue working on these between now and the public hearing. Next slide, please, Andrew. So we'll go ahead and start with the natural resources chapter. There are fewer changes to this one. Next slide, please. This chapter does cover 4 commercial resource industries here in the county. And these resource industries are called out under state law as things that we need to protect lands for. The policies in here will address the resource industry uses on rural lands. At the end of the day, what we need to do is ensure that we have enough lands to support the industry and maintain its viability within the planning period, and also to protect it from incompatible land uses. Next slide, please. So the big changes to chapter 3, as was noted by Loretta, is that narrative and data points, really trying to provide as much clarity to the public as to what this chapter is and what it isn't. We also are proposing to restructure the chapter. There's a lot of duplication as you kind of move through those different industries, especially as it related to land use conflicts and the conservation tools that the county has available. So we are trying to consolidate those and move those to a standalone section. We also have some updated goals and policies that we're working on as it relates to agriculture. For those planning commissioners that were here last year, we are working on a broader long-term agriculture zoning update. It went through the planning commission review last year. We're in the process of updating maps right now and hope to bring it to the board within the next month or 2. As that moves forward, there will be changes to this chapter, both to the designation criteria and maps and whatnot. Next slide, please. Got ahead of myself, I'm sorry. So the agriculture zoning update is referred to as CPA 16, that's the number. And the timeline for that is the end of 2024. So fingers crossed, by the time we get to a public hearing, we would have all those updates for the public's consideration, so they can, both the planning commission and the public can see it in the context of the rest of the updates to that chapter. Next slide. In terms of the comments, in addition to what you heard tonight, if you haven't had a chance to read through the comments we received, we did get requests to clarify conservation goals and identify specific action items. We also received comments around the protections, additional protections for trees, legacy forests, more support for our farmers. There is an interest in updating our incentives for farming and our land conservation programs. And I'm excited to say that the board just yesterday approve the contract for us to kick off our working lands conservation strategy. That's been a project that's been about a year in the works. It's grant funded. But that is specifically going to look at updates to all of those conservation incentive programs. I'm going to pause there because it's probably 7.
All right. Thank you. All right, it is now 7 o'clock. And we are going to pause our discussion of the comp plan and move on to our scheduled public hearing for the less restrictive alternative housing code update. All right, and I have an early version of our sign up sheet for in the boardroom. Can I get a show of hands for folks who are planning to comment? Okay, so it's still accurate. All right. With that, we'll go ahead and start our public hearing here in the board.
Commissioner,
Yeah,
did you receive the script?
I did not receive the
You would
script.
like it to my laptop. It's in your folder.
It's in
Yellow folder.
the yellow folder. Okay. That's helpful. Ah, here we go. Okay, so the hearing topic for today is the less restrictive alternative, state mandated sex offender housing. Today, the purpose, we are going to hold a public hearing on Development Code Docket Item A30, the less restrictive alternative community housing, otherwise known as LRA, state mandated sex offender housing. Okay, there's a sign-in sheet at the entrance, and I think we've got folks signed up there. If you're on Zoom and you wish to testify, go ahead and put your hand up now. We're gonna start in the boardroom here, but we'll move to the Zoom folks later. But if you would like to provide testimony and comment, go ahead and raise your hand. And when we move to the online comments, we'll move through those. So each person will have 3 minutes to testify. Please state your name clearly for oral testimony for the record. When you hear your name, please come forward and testify. Your time may not be given to another person. You'll have 3 minutes, and when testifying, again, please state your name and your address for the record. And Tasha will be keeping the time for us. All right, so we're gonna open the public hearing and then we're gonna move to a staff presentation. And then we will move to testimony. Sorry for any confusion. So go ahead.
Good evening, Commissioners. Anna Rodriguez here with Community Planning. Today we're here to hold a public hearing on the less restrictive alternative LRA state mandated sex offender housing code amendment, which is docket item A30 on the 2024-2025 official development code docket. The proposed amendments will bring Thurston County Code into alignment with RCW 71.09. These amendments include the creation of a definition for LRA housing and the outlining of standards for LRA housing facilities owned and operated by a private provider. These facilities will require a hearing examiner special use permit. Each proposal will be subject to a formal public hearing process to allow community members and the public to voice their opinions on the proposed facility. These amendments will affect Thurston County Code Titles 20 through 23, and the changes will apply to all of Thurston County, including the Lacey, Olympia, and Tubwater urban growth areas. The Planning Commission held 2 work sessions, one on April 17th, 2024, and one on May 1st, 2024. At the April 17th work session, the Planning Commission voted to set a public hearing for today, June 5th, 2024. Staff provided notice for the public hearing by publishing a legal notice in the Olympian on May 8th. A web mailer was sent to 1,063 subscribers on May 8th, and a press release was issued that same day, May 8th. Staff updated Thurston County's community planning webpage with all available documents related to this hearing. In addition to the required noticing for this hearing, staff, in partnership with the Board of County Commissioners Public Information Office, developed and issued additional social media posts and a Friday 5 statement to ensure the public were fully aware of this hearing. Posts were made to the county's Facebook and Instagram social media pages on May 8th, May 27th, and June 3rd, and the Friday 5 statement was published on May 27th. 3 written public comments were received on this proposal prior to the hearing. 2 were in direct opposition and 1 was a bit more neutral. Thank you. Staff has provided an optional motion for the Planning Commission to consider, and I'm here for any questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Do we have any questions before we move on? We'll go ahead and start testimony here in the boardroom. And it was Mr. Pettit and Ms. White, one to provide testimony, and we'll start with you, Mr. Pettit.
Good evening, my name is John Pettit. I live at 9725 Rich Road Southeast in East Olympia. I'm going to start out with a very brief little story about my last night. Last night as I was driving home, I suddenly saw something that wasn't right. There was this very dirty, obviously homeless type gentleman walking up along the road, and because I opened my property to the public, a little concerned. I don't want somebody that needs some help just wandering. And then they walked on past, and a little later they walked back. I was in my garden, I'm hearing him talk and yell at himself and a variety of things. The reason why I'm mentioning this is because typically we all live in fear. We live in fear of what we don't know may happen. And in this perfect world, if everything's going the right way, the way the transition plan is supposed to work, we don't have any problem. We don't have big issues coming up. I mean, in theory, the people that may be using the facilities are going to be having an escort anytime they leave the facility. In theory, they have all the security measures. But you know what? It isn't when everything's working that we have problems. It's when things aren't working. And that's where I'm bringing in some recommendations about I deal with land issues and development issues all the time. It can be a real gauntlet for a person to be able to use their own property. But I'm going to make recommendations upon things that I think will make us in a better spot. I pulled up the actual transition, the siting of a location for these facilities. And there's a number of things here I think is really important, and how you define a terminology quite often will make a difference. For instance, response time criteria. If there's emergency services, they need to be available quickly. Okay, that isn't like 25 minutes away. Well, that eliminates a whole lot of the outer county, because there's no way you can count on fast response time. Another thing that needs to happen is we need to be located within a reasonable commute of a location where they're going to get some of their treatment or things that they have to do. What's a reasonable commute? 5 minutes, 10 minutes? We can define that. And that's part of the guidelines that might be considered. Another part has to do with security. There's a global locating device put on every single person. You know, if you happen to be located in an area that doesn't have any internet, or your phone signals like you're going to hold your head to the floor over in the corner of the building in order to get a phone signal, you've lost that benefit. So I've dropped off this because there's a number of things that you can do in helping direct a written ordinance, all within boundaries of describing things that can be encouraged. These things need to be done within relatively close area. I can't imagine anything outside of a distance of a inner city transit bus being available. So I ran out of my time and push it on to somebody else, but I hope you make good decisions to help out the commissioners when they make a decision.
Thanks, Mr. Pettit.
Thank you.
All right, next up, we have Ms. Christy White.
evening, Commissioners. My name is Christy White and I live in the Delphi Valley. My ask is that the Planning Commission carefully evaluate the intent of allowing less restrictive alternative housing availability in the county. I remind you that this is a conditional release. State law does not eliminate the word restrictive, and the decision of what less means should be interpreted by the county. And I think that interpretation should be as restrictive as possible. Participants are still under conditions, and the guidance of the county is critical for what that means. To echo Mr. Pettit, I don't have all the details that he provided to you, but I think the facility should have that very detailed code. Efforts to be fair and equitable and reference to basic human needs, yes. But one of those needs is also public safety. The issue of public safety must be engaged with the utmost diligence and protections. Starting with the definition on page 2 of 15 of the amendment, attachment A 72.3, there is a sentence that refers to may offer 24-hour staffing and trained escorts. I would ask that that word be changed to must. Opening up all housing zones in the county, I would suggest these zones be considerably narrowed to mitigate the risk of potential harm or recidivism. Some studies show as high as 12% recidivism. If a cannabis store is restricted to its location and proximity, should not similar restrictions be put in place for an LRA? I don't also see in this amendment that public notice is particularly adequate. How is signage? How are neighbors notified? Are there postcards? Is there a website? So that the community has reasonable time. It's like, oh.
Oh, I think
Think it was ever started.
I think we forgot to time you.
You know, is there reasonable time for the community to be able to respond to an LRA that might be in their neighborhood? How do we do that? And then how do you audit a facility? Do you do surprise audits? What happens if they're not meeting their code that they should be? What is the remedy for that? How does the community be impacted if there is a problem with the facility? Where is that audit? If we can determine how many inches insulation should be in your house, and we get down into that detail, again, I would encourage that there be a detailed code for an LRA. It's the county's discretion, I believe, and I think it's the role and the obligation of the county to meet state law, but also provide protections. I don't believe this amendment is as detailed right now as it should be. I ask that you reevaluate the depth of the restrictions the county can apply per RCW 71.09.02. I believe there's much more that can be done and should be. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody online who would like to provide comment?
I believe I noticed Q&A having something.
It's taken care of.
Okay,
Cool. Just making sure.
all right. We've got one. Oh, two. Here we come. Let's do RG first, and then we'll do Keith Brown.
She just needs to unmute.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Oh yeah, there you go.
Oh.
You were unmuted for a moment. You're muted again.
There you go.
There we go.
able to hear me now?
Yeah.
Loud and clear, go for it.
Okay, great. Thank you for taking public comment. I appreciate it. My name is Rachel Gray. I'm in Thurston County. And I've been doing a considerable amount of research. I've been involved with the Sex Offender Policy Board meetings for well over a year now. I've been meeting with legislators all over the state regarding the SVP and LRA conditions. And so one of the things I wanted to point out about the public hearing notice was that there was a part on their lines 21 and 22 on the very first page that says offenders may be placed in LRA housing if court determine they no longer meet the definition of sexually violent predator. And I want to clarify, it's actually the opposite of that. To confirm, every proposed LOA placement for SPPs is for offenders who are currently rated as a sexually violent predator. The offenders are unconditionally released once they are no longer classified as sexually violent predators. So I just wanted the public to be aware that the risk rating is still there when we're talking about LRAs. And this is a huge challenge that we're facing because the LRAs are not going to go away. They are mandated as part of a pathway to unconditional release that is one of the only things that makes our civil commitment program constitutional. The other portion, the other element that allows our civil commitment program to be rendered constitutional is that it has to be considered a program of treatment or therapy, not incarceration. Otherwise, we would just be able to hold everybody that we thought was a risk. And it takes a lot of legal action to be able to classify someone as an SPP. So understanding these things, I was part of a Sex Offender Policy Board meeting where the previous Thurston County Manager, Ramiro Chavez, called in. He was berated and interrupted and then muted during the meeting. He was attempting to advocate for the public. At the same meeting, the Thurston County Prosecutor's Office also called in and they took the extraordinary measure of writing a formal letter requesting legal standing in any court hearings where an LOA was being proposed for Thurston County. That should be a statewide rule, I believe, so that would allow the community to become engaged to receive notice that there's a proposed LOA. Because a lot of these LOAs are actually just a room rented from another person, maybe not even rented. The last one that we know of was Rochester. That was a proposed one, and that was simply a sister that was going to allow her brother to stay in an RV on her lawn. So it wasn't even a rental situation. She had no accountability to have to report anything. When we have privatized this, we've incentivized people to not report because any violations that they might observe, because at that point they're endangering their meal tickets. So my questions, I guess, for the board today is how would a special use permit proposal apply to these private rental agreements where they're just one-on-one? Some of these are literally rooms rented from another sex offender and the state pays for that. That's mentioned in the Sex Offender Policy Board report.
Thank you.
Also, the proposal, I would love to see if the county can get behind support in tandem Thurston County Prosecuting Attorney's Office proposal to request legal standing in any case because of the fair share principle that we have. Means that a lot of the times when we have an LRA being placed in Thurston County, it's done by a judge that is completely outside of Thurston County, and we have no idea. Sometimes they don't show up on dockets, either King County, Kitsap County. Sometimes they require in-person presence in order to be able to speak. So I would love it if the county could somehow find a way to work in tandem with the Thurston County Prosecuting Attorney's Office for that, but also trying to understand how the special use permit program works for one-on-one.
Your time is up. Thank you for your comment. All right. Did we have another one queued up, Tasha?
Lowered their hand.
They lowered their hand. Okay, again, thank you for your comment. Is there anybody else left on line who would like to testify? All right, with that, we will close the public hearing and move on to a work session. Go ahead.
Ask a question about public comment in general.
Mhm.
Since being on the planning commission almost 3 years now, I've noticed changes in how we tabulate and organize and ask for information about public commenters and whatnot. Lately, we're getting these reports like this, and they show respondent ID, but not a name. Previously, there have been some names associated. This thing was handed to us as part of this packet. It has no information on time of delivery or any
That was
info.
our last public commenter. wrote
It
that.
was
I
submitted around
seem
3:30
prepared.
today.
Okay. So also, we've had this weird policy in meetings of asking public commenters, sometimes state your name, sometimes state your address, sometimes state what part of the county you live in. I've seen it very inconsistently happening. I would like us to be more consistent, and if we're gonna ask some people for names, let's ask everyone for names and put them on here. If we're not gonna have names, then let's not ask anyone for names or addresses, but let's just be consistent is my request.
I think we can be consistent in the ask, but I don't think we can require people to provide it.
Sure.
All right. Well, with that,
Quick follow-up to that is, what is the consistent ask that we want to make?
So generally with the Board of County Commissioners, it's your name and your address. Okay. And so I think our public hearing script also references that, and so it would just be a matter of pushing that forward to just general comment.
Yep.
I would like us to generally do that.
Consistency makes sense.
all right. Okay.
Are we gonna start the work session?
Yep, I think we're gonna start the work session now. All right, moving on to our work session number 3 for the public hearing on the less restrictive alternative housing code update. And did you have,
I do not.
okay,
Just any conversation or clarification you may have, whether you move forward, whatever your recommendation may be.
okay. All right, well, we can start our discussion here on, I assume we're gonna be talking about the draft, but go ahead, Commissioner.
But just to address at least some of the comments that we heard, the idea that sexually violent predators were the people that were explicitly being placed in there. RCW 7109-090, section 1A, which is the very beginning of it, defines it, states that if the secretary determines that the person's condition has so changed that the person no longer meets the definition of a sexually violent predator, the secretary shall authorize the person to petition the court for an unconditional discharge. The petition shall be filed with the court and served upon prosecuting agency responsible for the initial commitment. The court, upon receipt of the petition for unconditional discharge, shall within 45 days order a hearing. I think that's where we pulled that language saying no longer. It's section B that defines it, but it doesn't state that their status has changed. It just states that the secretary shall authorize the person to, conditions can be imposed that adequately protect the community. So section B, which defines LRA housing not discharge, doesn't state that they have to have gone from sexually violent predator down. So that does appear to perhaps be incorrect. So before we might want to fix that before we cite that in the.
So there, when we did run these, run this definition by, it was in the opinion of the prosecuting attorney's office that it is based off of them being their classification changing to being no longer sexually violent. And that is the allowance that allows the courts to provide them that.
As long as legals looked at it, then I guess that's fine. I understand why reading it could be confusing like that, because it confused me.
Stay long.
Oh,
Commissioner Geiser.
sorry, I had one more thing.
Oh, we'll go. Andy, you're
Good, sorry.
I was interested in going back to the discussion about the sentence, less restrictive alternative community housing is operated by a private provider and may offer 24-hour staffing and trained escorts. Just one of our other commenters mentioned. We had a good discussion about that word may, and we suggested stronger.
Yeah.
Is it that the RCW does not permit us to have a stronger?
Yes, so this was one of the planning commission's big pieces in the first work session on April 17th. And when conferring with the prosecuting attorney's office, it does, state law does not specify it, so we would be overstepping as a jurisdiction if we were to restrict more than the state requires.
And so, yes, I remember now, we had asked to make it more specific and you were gonna consult, and they came back and said, no, we may not be more specific.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Oh, so I'm sorry,
I was gonna bring up the same thing and remind us that.
I don't think it's inappropriate for the planning commission to make the recommendation that the word should be changed from may to must.
No, absolutely. You all, any recommendation that you would like to pass on to the board.
We can make that recommendation, we can put it in this, and the BOCC can change it, but we have the authority to put it in there.
I'd second that motion.
And I would absolutely support it as well. How might we proceed with that?
Vote.
A straw poll or a formal vote?
I make a motion that we change the word may to must. Offer 24-hour staffing and training escorts.
I second the motion.
Any discussion?
Oh, I guess my question is gonna be, so did the attorneys say we can't use must? And we have to use may, or did they say, just say we can't use must?
They said we can't go more more restrictive than what state law prescribes.
Cause I'm wondering if we could go slightly to past may and change it to
But
should.
not all the way to must.
Shall.
Should, yeah. So it gives the commissioners, if they decide to do that, some leeway.
I
not-
think it's may and should is just equivalent in my book.
I think that if they want to find wiggle room, they can find it on their own and we can send them a strong message of must.
I totally agree with Commissioner Halverson that this word needs to be changed to must. We can make a recommendation whether or not to take it.
Shall is also a little bit different in that it confers a obligation instead of a requirement.
Well, they can downgrade it from must to shall. But I think that our recommendation.
If we want to try and find a different word to
Yeah.
throw against the.
Must is something that grows on grapes, but I still support this.
Maybe that's more wise.
All right, do we want to do this as a voice or a roll call? Voice vote, okay, all in favor of the recommended change?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right. Right, any others?
I did, I remember the conversation we had about, less restrictive alternative community housing doesn't specify sexual predators. Okay, we had that conversation. So Andrew, what did it come back? Can we change it?
Well,
Yeah.
we can change the title so long as it accurately reflects what it actually is. It is a policy decision ultimately because the point of these facilities is not to stigmatize the residents. And so by including the name sex offender, it could be stigmatizing to some.
Yeah.
However, the planning commission has the authority to offer any
But
recommendations.
really, they don't care what stigmatism it puts on it. They're already stigmatized as far as I'm concerned. And I think that the title of this needs to include sexual predator,
Sex offender.
sex offender. Yeah. Otherwise, the community at large doesn't understand what it really is about. Just like this public meeting and public hearing, a lot of people don't know what it's really about.
I wanted to follow up on that because I know that you guys had some wording and I think that we're kind of looking at this from the wrong direction. I know that we're looking at this from a housing direction and I don't see this as a housing direction. I see it only tangentially as housing because these are not zoning codes for housing. These are zoning codes for a business.
Yeah.
And so I think that the terminology that we should use is state mandated residential sex offender treatment facility. Because what these are treatment facilities. It even says that it's court ordered treatment. And this is a residential facility.
Yeah.
So thinking of this as the business that it is and not just another housing initiative is where we really need to come at this from.
I agree.
Commissioner.
Well, that's an interesting point from a business perspective. So are there other portions of county code that where business code a recommendation should be made about business code changes?
Well, I think that the building and development code is probably different than what the zoning code is, but if we're going to be using a term here, that it would go across all of them. And quite honestly, that's another point that I was gonna come up to is, I know that this is about the zoning portion of it, but there is going to be a portion of this that is about the operation of this, just like there is any other business, and maybe even the licensing. And I know that the county doesn't have a lot of specialized business licenses like some other jurisdictions do. But I think that the county should consider, and the planning commission should probably make a recommendation to the BOCC that they enact a specific business license for this kind of business. And we do it for all sorts of other stuff where you have to have a special license to run a nursing home, you have to have a special license to run a vet clinic, you gotta have all sorts of special licenses.
Foods.
Yeah, and so and maybe that doesn't happen in zoning, maybe that happens in an operational code or building and development code or something like that. But I think that does need to be there. I do know that the state offers a sex offender treatment provider license. I think that one of those licenses should hang on the wall in any one of these buildings, and if it's not there, then it shouldn't be one of these places. If you don't have a sex offender treatment provider license, you shouldn't be offering sex offender residential treatment facilities. And I also think that if there is a violation of any of these codes, that the occupancy permit should be pulled until the violations are fixed. But that's probably another discussion. But I do think that the most important thing here is that we realize that these are not specifically about housing. It's tangential to housing. This is about zoning a business, and as a business, we should call it what it is, which is a state mandated residential sex offender treatment facility.
I'll second that.
So are you making two proposals there?
I'll make the first motion
Okay.
that the county officially refer to these as state mandated residential sex offender treatment facilities.
I'll second that.
Okay, it's moved and seconded. Any discussion?
I'm not sure, honestly, I agree on this. I mean, part of the role here is to align this with state law, and if we drastically relabel everything, it makes it hard to parse the difference between the two. The only area in here, I think, where we aren't calling this out enough is we've pasted into a number of sections, including 72.3, the exact definition pulled from I think RCW. And it just states to house people for court ordered treatment. That is the definition. That is where people will go to try and find out what this is, if they know how to navigate the code even a little bit. And I think that's where people should be replaced with sex offenders. I don't think that we should be completely relabeling LRA housing, because anyone who's looking for this or looking at this in the broader spectrum, the state is going to be looking for that, because that's what it's called at the state level, and they would miss ours. So that's my thought.
It could be clunky, but what about just tacking the two together?
I think we should maintain less restrictive alternative if we want to, because that's LRA.
Essentially explain it.
It's gonna be really long if we do it that way, but at least if people go looking for LRA, they find it, not some new acronym that we've invented just for Thurston County.
Well, we really haven't changed the acronym LRA. All we've done is put an extension on it.
Right.
That's all we've done. So if they look up LRA, they're gonna find LRA.
We have to use the LRA
Right.
nomenclature in our code anyways, but it could be anywhere in the code. I think that
We could also like footnote it
or do intent or finding or anything.
with brackets and. Yeah.
I just like to make one more point on the motion that I made about inserting must for May. Just wanted to make sure, Anna, you understand that goes in 4 different locations in these different, okay. Just wanted.
Commissioner Bartlett, did you have? Oh.
I do.
Oh, Commissioner Wizard.
I agree with, we have this at the top of this document calling it socket, less restrictive alternative, and then parentheses LRA, then colon, state mandated sex offender housing. I think you're simply asking to change that latter part, which I agree with. I agree with the motion, but have a clarifying question for staff about this comment about. If you look on page 1 of this docket item here, line. 17, 18, and 19, it talks about there are 2 types of facilities in which the courts can place individuals, those run by DSHS and then by a private provider, LRA or private provider. The person who sent up this public comment and made verbal public comment says on their second page, or I'm sorry, they talk about the fact that somebody in Rochester was going to have their sister or brother live on a spot on an RV on their grass. Is that true? Because that doesn't fit this. And so if we're talking about housing or these treatment facilities, is that misleading or is that true that that can happen? An individual can be placed on an RV in someone's yard.
I did not look into whether the Rochester incident happened or not, since we did receive this around 4 o'clock. I was trying to compile my notes for you all. However, that's not an excuse. I am going to make an assumption that of course is not fact, that I imagine in that case, it was someone who was unconditionally released and then was able to live with a family member. It's my understanding so far, since the courts deem where these folks live, I can't imagine the courts would deem that they could just like move into my spare bedroom. However, that is my assumption and I did not fact check that for you all.
That helps me.
I think what you're looking for is best professional judgment. Go
Yes.
ahead.
There's quite a few things in here that from public comment that I think bear discussion.
But in this motion or?
There's still a motion
separate
on
from
the
this
table.
There's still a motion.
Yeah.
That's just one of them.
And to clarify the motion, are we looking to retain the less restrictive alternative?
I think we have to.
Give it the long
Yeah.
definition?
Yeah, the part that says state mandated sex offender housing, change that to state mandated residential sex offender treatment facility.
State mandated residential.
State mandated residential sex offender treatment facility.
We're already on 2 lines of text for it. We might as well fill it out.
Go for it. State mandated residential sex offender.
Residential does cover housing, so it's a place where.
Facility.
That one rolls right off the
It
tongue.
does, it'll be now. But the word sex offender are really important in there.
Yeah.
As we discussed before.
Yes.
The smirk stuff. Okay, any more discussion on the motion?
No, I would say, I know you talked about it basically being a commercial enterprise, and I agree. I think requiring these special use permits is treating it like the commercial entity that it is, just like dog kennels or energy generators or things like that. And so I want to thank you guys. I think that was well done. I think that will give a lot more communication to the community, which they're entitled to when these things come in. And I know that part of this is a little difficult just looking at a table, but that's what that means, that this will be something that goes before a hearings officer, right?
Okay.
Voice vote on that.
Public comment.
Yeah, any other discussion before we take the vote? All right, we'll do a voice vote. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that motion passes.
So the second part of that, or another part of that I had was, and maybe you need to, maybe I'm just a little too dumb to understand exactly what we're doing here, because through the zoning code, we can only do so much about the operations of these facilities. But through the zoning code, we can have some limits on operations, just like the next one that takes a special use permit, the kennels, they limit it to 11 or 10 or under, or 11 or more. So we could probably do something within zoning where what I'd like to see is limit the maximum number of LRA residents to the number of bedrooms -1 in the facility. And the reason for that is so that way they're not, if you have a 4-bedroom house, you can accommodate 3 of these people plus have a room for the may or must person that's going to be living there or the treatment provider that's living there. But we don't want them stacked up like cordwood in this house either, or all of a sudden you have a 4-bedroom house that has 15 court ordered mandated treatment receivers there. So I think
One
that,
septic system.
yeah.
Yeah, or just living.
Yeah.
living human beings.
And it is a health and safety issue, and it's also just, we'd like to see some limits on this. So I think that if we can say only up to 10 dogs in a kennel, and I know that I'm not trying to equate these people to dogs or anything, but it is something that we do within our code, in our zoning, that we can limit the number of residents in a facility to the number of bedrooms minus 1.
What do you?
So he's,
I made that up.
Okay.
I have seen that. See,
Yeah.
it's to be new, but what he's saying is this is segmented.
I don't disagree. I agree with you.
Yeah.
I was looking for the location that you were bringing out.
And that's probably one of the operational limits you can do through zoning. And so I'd like to see us do that.
Where would you plan on inserting that?
You have the language.
So it would be under table 1, I would believe,
I would,
under use.
yeah, I would do it under use just like they did with the number of dogs in a dog
Well,
kennel thing.
you already have 19.5 less restrictive alternative community housing, which the subject or title of that would change based on what we just talked about to make it more stand out as to what it actually is. But you could also include underneath there that it would be based on number of bedrooms in the facility, less
Minus
1.
We can absolutely figure out a good location for that within the use specifics.
Yeah, you understand the intent though.
Right.
Yeah,
As a
for
sub,
Stefan.
Yeah, I
as a
think
sub bullet
it's,
under E, it might work.
Mhm.
Where it says has to conform with Title 20 and all other applicable codes and ordinances.
Right, yeah, you're right. That would be on page 4, 3 and 4.
That's not in just that location. It would have to be under multiple locations.
I think we could send that back to staff to decide the best place to put it. And
What we'll do is, when we bring this material packet to the Board of County Commissioners, we'll bring every recommendation from the Planning Commission with all options for them to consider as to the location, the content, and so on, and let them kind of mull it over based on your.
You're gonna,
recommendations.
when that particular thing goes before the Board of County Commissioners, we all need to know, because there's probably several of us that would like to be there to testify about this.
Absolutely.
and everyone else. Yeah, go ahead.
Clarification, we have a gentleman online who is a state representative representing the 35th district. And he's interested in making a comment in the chat. Is that something he can do?
We've closed the public hearing,
Okay.
unfortunately.
But he can send his comments to staff.
We forward it to the Board of County Commissioners.
Thank you.
Just to follow up on what we were just discussing, would you all,
Here.
I might be overstepping, would you like to move
You
to
wanna- you
include
want a
that as a
motion?
formal
Yeah.
recommendation?
Yeah.
Because I don't wanna, put
Okay,
it
then-
and then you all.
Then
that
I
would
would
be a
move that, I would move that we limit the maximum number of LRA residents to the number of bedrooms minus 1 in the zoning, in our zoning code.
Second that.
All right, any discussion? Before we take a vote.
I think it makes sense from a safety perspective for the folks who are being treated there as well as the general community. These are for-profit endeavors and they're getting paid thousands of dollars per human. And when that profit motive is there, it can distort what should be taking care of people who need a higher level of attention into exploiting essentially state funds. And I feel like this is a good way of stopping that sort of extractive behavior.
I agree.
I like that. That's great.
So the bedroom that is set aside, is there language any place that talks about a specific use for that bedroom?
I don't think we need to put that in code, but the intent is that it's for on-site services, provider of on-site services.
They're supposed to have 24-hour
Yeah.
services. You gotta have a place for that person that's there to live too.
Yeah.
I just wonder if that's an additional restriction that we could encode.
I'd be afraid to do that just in case the BOCC says, no, you can't do must there, and then so they throw the whole thing out. And I don't wanna, I want that bedroom left open for the service provider.
At least removes the incentive to, or the ability to.
Yes,
fill it
game the
with it.
system.
I'll still find a closet to put it back in.
They'll
and say
probably
it's a
try.
fourth
They'll
bedroom,
probably
but
try.
It's worth the effort.
Okay. All right,
Voice vote.
yeah, we will call a question. All in favor of the proposed motion?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion passes.
Do you know if we will, if the operation of these facilities and the codes developed for that will come to the planning commission at some point or another? Or are these gonna be developed independently right through the board?
The recommendations that we're talking about today.
Well, not for the zoning portion of this, but for the licensing portion of an LRA facility.
They will not be coming through the planning commission. That would be done through the permit process, and that would go before the hearing examiner. They would review the contract that the state and the private provider have.
Well, the county can make code on how these facilities need to be operated, just like we made code about how they can store recycled asphalt at the gravel pits.
How to install
Yeah.
those cell phone relay stations on the public streets.
Okay, so how will those rules be made?
If they don't fall within zoning and they're more administrative for the county, that would be a work session with the Board of County Commissioners. However, we can take recommendations from the planning commission that feed into that process if they are open to that idea.
So I would think we might wanna outline any of those beyond the development code recommendations and send those as like a separate set of recommendations. But I think we had Commissioner Pessinger, Commissioner Fishburne, then Commissioner Bartlett.
You can wait longer, go proceed if you like.
No, I've just been thinking about what Commissioner Casino said and combining that with some of the comments from Resident White. Then I think about some of the things that we see around, health code restrictions for restaurants and things like that. So it brings me to the topics that Resident White brought up about facility audits, consequences, and remedies. Are there additional measures that we should be thinking about with respect to those topics for these facilities? What was the Stafford facilities? State mandated residential sex offender treatment facilities.
And I think the question is, are some of those abilities inherent in the zoning code versus would those have to be some other administrative?
My question was along the same vein, and I was gonna ask staff as the Board of Health has weighed in on this topic in any way, shape, or form, because it seems a lot of this has to do with public health issues.
The Board of Health has not reviewed this. However, staff from Environmental Health has provided their comments, and those are what you see with the water, the sanitation, and the food handling requirements. And they all have permits for those, and they do have the ability to revoke those permits.
Okay, so pretty much all of the use specific standards, do those all have an enforcement mechanism? Or like a long-term enforcement mechanism? So if they were out of compliance with any of those, it would get revoked.
It would be shifted to the code compliance group that would be responsible for looking into the complaints that led to a supposed violation. Ultimately, if there is any sort of complaint that is considered valid, most likely that would result in a contractual violation between the private provider and the Department of Correction. And so it's quite possible, like, we could identify the issue, but most likely the real response to it will take place at the state level.
And I know most of our code is like compliance is complaint driven. Is there a way to do this affirmatively?
Thank you. I was gonna ask that as well.
We would have to look into that, but I'm not aware of any currently that we are more proactive.
We have the director here. Maybe he can answer.
Well, let's have this conversation.
Can we require that a copy of this sex offender treatment provider license be on file with the county, and any changes in that license need to be notify the county of changes?
I think we could look at doing that. I think that could be a condition of the hearing examiner. That they have to provide that, and whenever there's a change, they provide us a new copy. So that,
Let me jump in. I think that Commissioner Day was on the right path, lining out these are items that are outside of the zoning. And if we could have time to review those bullet points, I think that would be helpful. Because as you've already heard, our jurisdiction is very limited on this topic. And so to answer those questions without having some time to review is getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. So thank you for that suggestion.
The problem with that, Director Cummings, is that if we're going to try to get a recommendation tonight, we would need to make those decisions now. And I don't know if we'll be able to make a recommendation tonight if we haven't been able to noodle through those things.
Staff
Which is
doesn't have the
fine.
information to answer those questions.
And if I may, I think what's before us is the zoning code. So I think technically those are, outside.
Operational issues.
Operational, and I think we could choose to make recommendations on those, but I think we could decouple them from the zoning code decision if we wanted to.
I don't mind loading up this recommendation. I really don't.
It packages it all together.
Yeah.
Yep.
And if they make us break it out and go through them again later on the operational stuff, that's fine. That's work that, we should do. But if we can do some of this now and get ahead of it, that doesn't hurt my feelings one bit.
Yeah, and also, like, my guess is it'll be a minute before this gets on do we know when this is on the commissioner's docket?
I submitted a board briefing request this week for early August.
Early
Okay,
August.
so we have
They have a
plenty of
recess
time.
in July, I believe.
So we would still have time to send a stapled together packet, it sounds like.
If we had another work session.
If we had another work session, and I think the work session could even be just general recommendations on LRA wraparound code, something like that.
Outside of the zoning.
So if, for example, we wanted to make a motion on the current zoning code, we could do that tonight and then come back to the others if we had to. If we wanted to basically let staff have an opportunity to dig into some of the recommendations, maybe even run them by council, and then we could send that package forward.
My big fear is that we'd never come back. With that, we made a decision on zoning and we wouldn't have, it would never come back to us at that. And so if we wanted to address this again, we just go to the BOCC individually, but not as a planning commission. Because once we knock this off our docket, once we've made a recommendation on this and it's off of our docket, technically, we don't have to ever see it again. Especially when we got 2045 that's loaded up our calendar really tight.
Okay, I hear you.
And this, this could be a 15-minute session. With recommendations pre-submitted to Tasha and sent out to all the commissioners prior to the meeting.
Is a mechanism to move to table this to a date specific?
Well, I'd still like to get through more of this tonight that we could, but
I'd like to load up our list if we can.
yeah, I'd like to go as far as we could.
Maybe at the end of that.
Yeah.
Do that.
I'm gonna go back to the business part. I think we require documentation on other things in zoning, like I'll use maybe like with a gravel mine, I believe we require them to give us their reclamation plan and be on files. And I would assume that when that changes, it has to come back, and that's zoning. So I think that there's probably a way we could work something in that this license or contract or something needs to be included, and I think what I'm thinking is it needs to be in here. Because if it's not in here, I don't know how the hearings examiner says you don't have that, so you can't go forward.
I agree.
How would it be put in there, Scott? Excuse me, Commissioner Nelson.
That's a good question.
I think that's what we're all struggling with.
Yeah,
Either piece of it. Any recommendations?
maybe.
I think we could tie it to, we said something.
Probably, I was thinking probably somewhere in the use specific standards,
Under the table.
where we've got the list of. You must demonstrate that all applicable requirements under chapter 7109 have been met. Served an appropriate public water supply and wastewater disposal. Food establishment operating permit. I think at the end of that.
And any other applicable, like. Right,
Yeah.
cause that would give you the space to then do the outside zoning code requirements and then be able to look back at the zoning code. And determine what
That'll be on page 10 is what you're talking about.
I see
I
it on
think-
page 6 of 15. Is that what you're thinking?
No, I turned the page. I lost it.
Is it the section indicating?
No, it would be.
Under any of the use specific standards, depending on what title it's in,
So it'd be what, 3 different places?
4 different places.
4 different places?
Yeah.
It's the same, it's the same
Right.
language.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the same.
Right.
I was looking at page 13.
But
It'd be the same under whatever zoning district.
yeah,
Just different, codes.
It does say, we do have a. Shall conform with Title 22 and all other applicable codes and ordinances.
That's the same place we talked about the bed limit being.
well, I don't see having. I don't see there being a problem with requiring that license to be on file with the county and any changes to that license being notified to the county.
And read off from the minimum is, this is kind of what kind of ties closely with that. It's copies of any reports, records, except for financial records required to be submitted for federal, state, or regional county officials or agencies pursuant to any law or regulations shall be made available upon county request. So we could amend that slightly so that we could require it upfront and then look at some sort of language to require these sort of subsequent changes to staffing to bring that to us as well.
I would think
Shall
that,
provide and maintain.
yeah,
Pretty neat.
I like that.
Does anyone know where the distance requirements are from school, bus stop, 600?
That's my next one.
Are they in here?
But the catch-all of referring to 71.09 RCW, that call out specifically so that we adhere to the requirements in the RCW.
Where it says 71-09 RCW have been met.
Well, I just, to really nail that point down, it seemed like that there was really 2 classes of distances. One was K through 12's 500 feet, and the other one was from risk potential facilities. And I would hope that the way that we're doing this is a distance away from risk potential facilities and not only K through 12s. And the risk potential facilities as out of 71.09.020.14.
For clarity, really quick, we've made a couple of recommendations here that had a lot of support, but we haven't formally voted to include any of them. Are there any that you're ready for?
We have taken a couple of them.
But we've now discussed a few more.
Right.
Yeah.
I wanna like solidify some of this for the sake of the staff.
We're just trying to identify where it would go.
Yeah. Well, I think that you guys had already, or Andrew, you indicated that you can put in the part about the licensing being available.
We can bring that recommendation.
Yeah,
And so
bring
if
that
there's
recommendation.
a general consensus among the planning commission.
So
can
I
go
guess we
ahead
didn't
and
take an
That was the
official.
one.
include that recommendation.
You feel like you have what you need, and do we wanna
Voice vote that?
voice vote that just so that we can,
Really articulate it before we do a voice vote.
could you help us articulate it?
Yes.
So that I accurately reflect what your recommendation is in my document.
Okay.
Thank you.
I would move that we require that the sex offender treatment provider license must be provided to the county, and that any changes or updates to it must be notified to the county within 72 hours.
Second that.
Any discussion?
Do we need to add any teeth to that recommendation? Any teeth to that recommendation? Like, what are the consequences if
I
they
don't know how we do compliance issues on any of that.
Particularly with state agencies.
Yeah.
So is compliance,
Because compliance is kind of
separate
its
motion?
own thing. Because any violation of county code has to go through the standard compliance.
I recommend that we discuss compliance separately, just for the same reason that you'd mentioned before of like, if we get into something where they strike that down, I don't want to just strike down other things that we've wasted or spent a lot of time on.
Fair enough. I just don't want us to lose the opportunity to have that discussion.
Yeah.
Do we,
Absolutely.
do we want to include the and maintain language that Chair Day brought up? Your language says submit, and he said submit and maintain.
Submit, maintain, yeah, any changes, maintain, if, there's a change in it, that
Okay.
would.
I thought that was a neatly, a tighter way to.
Why don't you throw
express
the
it.
maintain in there too?
I didn't want that point to be lost. I like that. It was a very tidy piece of language.
All right, any more discussion before we put this to a vote? All right, all in favor of the motion? Aye. Any opposed? All right, that motion passes.
So the next motion would be, I would move that our distance restrictions are, let's see.
Keep going here.
That citing requirements shall be outside of 500 feet of risk potential facilities instead of just K through 12 facilities.
Should we specify K through 12 and say an and?
K through
then?
12 is covered in risk potential facilities. So K through 12 is very small. Risk potential facilities is very big.
Is risk potential facilities defined either in RCW or WAC or in the Thurston County Code?
It's defined in 7109020014.
Daycare centers, YMCA's.
I know, there was the issue with
I understand.
we noted in here with the bus stop, it wasn't a children's bus stop, and so that it got missed.
It wasn't the
That was my,
children's
that's
stop,
my
it was a
concern I had,
city
is if we wanted to keep it separate, just so that if the language changed later, that specific use would stay within it, but I think we're safe.
I think it's safe.
Okay, do you have a second for your motion?
Second.
So,
All right.
I'll
Okay,
second that.
any discussion?
Yeah.
All right, no discussion, we'll take a vote.
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that motion passes as well.
I'd just like to make a comment. I think this is really important what we're doing. I think it's very likely that the board will not agree with this because of other legal issues, but I think for our community, it's really important to take these votes, and I'm very happy with the direction we're going.
Well, Commissioner Kaiser, what I would suggest is sometimes the boards will listen if several planning commissioners go before the BOCC at the hearing and testify about why we added that language into it. That does impact them.
I apologize for backtracking. I was planning on hyperlinking the RCW you mentioned, and I absolutely typed the numbers in the wrong order.
It's 7109020014.
290.
Jump back just a little bit to the compliance conversation. One alternative, instead of going into the specifics of the compliance, is to kind of take the approach of like with the industrial land study, the overarching topic. So the planning commission could actually just recommend that the board consider compliance alternatives for this use and kind of leave it at the board's discretion to kind of pick and choose the ways in which they wish they would want to enforce the requirements of this code.
The only comment I would have about that is sometimes when you have leaders and they got 5 of them sitting up there, they don't really know what they want, and sometimes they need recommendations so that then they can make they can look at those recommendations and decide if that's what they want to go with, or they can modify it. I mean, as a leader, that's what you want your staff and your commissions to do for you, is to provide that type of information. That's the only comment I would have on that, Andrew, instead of leaving it up to them to figure it out. I mean, that's what I think our job is to some extent.
Commissioner Bummer.
I wonder if there's a yes and situation here, if maybe we can follow your advice on asking them to consider, and then as a separate work session, draft some recommendations to include with that for code violations. Would that be a happy compromise? So they're still hearing our suggestions, but it is ultimately framed in a way that's at their discretion, and then it's on us to be there and to.
Well, it's ultimately up to their discretion.
I
Anyway.
I know, but.
You okay? No, I got it.
Oh, sorry.
Been working too hard today.
I actually, so when I initially had my self in queue a while back, before we got into this, my recommendation was going to be pretty similar, which is that it seems like we have a lot of recommendations that we want to make in this document, and I think that's a good idea. It seems like we have additional stuff that we want to bring up within it that I think actually is going to be a stronger presentation if we bring it up separately outside of the morass they're going to be getting for this, because our voices are loud here, but there's going to be a lot of voices participating in this, even at the commissioner level. And so hearing from us twice on it, I think is actually going to be a little bit better in that.
While I would normally agree with you, I think that as soon as we make our recommendation on this code amendment, it will be off our plate and we won't see it at this body again.
Okay.
Address that, could we motion to add a work session
Yeah.
to a future meeting so that we know it won't?
Was it something that Commissioner Pessinger's idea of tabling for a future date does essentially
So that we know
push
it
it forward
comes
on our
back up.
agenda?
I mean, we
Yeah.
could amend an agenda before we approve it
That's
at
true.
any meeting.
But we want staff prepared for it. And so the only way that we could make sure that staff did bring it back to us is if we didn't take our final action tonight.
We didn't recommend adoption of this.
If we did not, if we
Then we
postponed our
get- The
recommendation.
chair recommends that they bring it back at another
Mhm.
work session.
I think if we can get through this and say, staff, go ahead and you've got our direction, bring whatever, whether it's the next meeting or the meeting after that, bring it back to us so we can have a final review. And then we, just not make a recommendation tonight, I think is sufficient.
Sorry. Ann.
I'm gonna be here for plenty of Thurston 2045, so it's okay. Seeing a lot of me and other staff.
Okay, I would say that we build out our list of stuff we'd like to see and then decide how we want to move forward. Commissioner Pessinger.
I have questions, again, looking at the public comments. I have them written down as RG who provided them, but they said a name, but I couldn't hear it.
Ruth.
I think it's Rachel Grayless. Oh, Rachel, what? I think it's Rachel Grayless. I'm not sure.
Two things on page 2. The third paragraph down. RCW indicates a registry shall be searchable by county, but it apparently is not. This is not really zoning related, but if any of this is remotely true, that public notification of sex offenders in, very, very well happening, it causes me great concern. It may well be an issue for public health. Number 2, the next section continues on to describe scenarios, including that example that I think was, well, this may be a different one in Rochester, it's simply a room rented sister. Then on the next page at the top, it talks about Olympia's situation with a specific person in 2018. It talks about contracted versus uncontracted. And basically advocates if these providers have to be contracted, then there's more security in place, there's more access to their record, there's more accountability, there's more things like, addressing those safety concerns like mold and lack of heat and all those kinds of things. Does staff know anything about contracted versus uncontracted facilities?
My understanding, they're all required to be contracted, and in the language that we have in the draft ordinances, the catch-all of, including all applicable contractual agreements with DSHS. So if someone were to come in to the permit text with a proposal and they were uncontracted, they would not be able to move forward, should this code language stay the same. And to your first point, semi-adjacently, I did speak to the program coordinator with the Washington Association of Sheriff and Police Chiefs about whether these residents are required to register in the sex offender registry, and they are. So just something I looked into prior to this.
Registering and posting is two different things.
Yes.
Just finally pointed that out.
Yes.
Our county sheriff has a good record of posting.
Searchable by county is what they're saying. It doesn't happen. It's required, but it currently is not. That's the fourth paragraph on page 2 here. One would have to type hundreds of addresses daily to cross-reference to see if a new sex offender has been added to the database.
You can go by city, which of course is not the same as county.
Okay.
All right, well, do we have any more changes that we'd want to make to the proposed language? Before we move on to any recommendations that are outside.
Sorry, that to finish my last one. Can you please confirm for us for our next meeting on this topic that contracted versus uncontracted is absolutely a requirement? There's 3 or 4 examples here of uncontracted.
Yeah, and I'm also gonna note that we're over time, but I think it's worth letting this discussion play itself out.
I have one thing that we might want to consider. I'm not sure if this is a conversation for this or that future session. But part of the findings, because a lot of this was set up by judges, not a law passing, was requirements that let me see if I can find it. So that the treatment providers are required to report violations immediately to the court, the prosecutor, the supervising corrections officer, the superintendent special commitment center. So any violations of the security, the distance, these providers are already required to provide that to a number of officials. I'm wondering if it's reasonable for us to put into code that we should also be informed.
Well, excuse me, but that comes into the effect that if the treatment providers actually report. Okay.
I understand, but in this, if they're already providing that notice, could we require in code that they also provide the notice to the county? It might make it easier if someone were to do a public records request on a particular facility, or if we do end up doing this proactively where we're producing it, like a convenient packet on that site or the county in general, they would have those violations ready instead of having to hop around different enforcement entities to find that information. I think the public has a right to know, and I'm not sure if we're allowed to also require that, but if we can, they're already producing the report for other entities. I don't see why submitting a copy to us of these things would be unreasonable.
You're talking about the facility.
The providers
treatment
have to,
facility?
the treatment provider, they have to present a course of treatment, and then any violations of the course of the treatment, they have to submit to all of these entities.
Right, and that's my point is most of them won't submit violations.
I don't think we can compel them to.
Well, what you can do.
Well, if you do,
right,
and they don't.
Well, that's where you get into
Shut down.
enforcement.
Exactly.
Okay,
And
whereas
that's why I
if you
wasn't sure
find
this
out there
would
was a
come.
violation that they didn't report, then the enforcement of that would be the key.
Because what we're trying to provide a tool for here. I do like this idea.
I like the public's right to know. I'm a public records officer in my day job too, so so I understand how convenient it is to be able to ask about one thing and get all of it instead of have to jump around to get a complete picture of what's happening with the public's dollars.
I guess I just don't trust these providers to.
And then if somebody
I've
finds that
already
they
my
haven't.
feelings. Right.
So I think the question would be really, where would that live? Would that live in, could that live in the code here? Is that
That
outside.
seems kind of outside the zoning realm, but it
Mhm.
could be a recommendation the planning commission makes to the
At
Board
the
of
next
County.
meeting of the code thing.
Yep, to the Board of County
I just wasn't
Commissioners
sure, I
to
just wanted
look
to get
at
it in the
some sort of
notes.
alternative for collecting this data.
I do like the idea of introducing that as one of our slate for our next session.
Yeah, probably part of the business license. That, you know, if the county can have a specific business license for these treatment facilities, that would be conditional in the business license.
So what I'm hearing is I think we're done with comments on the
The zoning.
proposed language on
Mm.
the zoning.
Unless we can get in some of the operational standards in there somehow.
I think we need the information.
But I think staff has to work that out.
Exactly. So do we want to make a list of the operational standards we'd like staff to explore?
Right now.
I think we can make a start on some of them.
Yeah, Director Cummings says yes, please.
Yeah, cause I mean, even in these use standards, we say the maximum size of a grocery store shall be 50,000 square feet. So if we can tell a grocery store they gotta be 50,000 square feet, we should be able to tell a sex offender treatment facility that they have to comply with certain issues.
Christy White mentioned the inches of insulation, but I still think we shouldn't cover aesthetics.
It just doesn't matter if there are neon cows out front, honestly.
Or maybe that could be.
Sorry, let's call back to the Tumwater design code.
Yeah. So maybe like Commissioner Baumgartner was talking about, one of our use standards is that those violation reports also need to come to, would they go to the sheriff or would they go to public health or they go to CPED compliance?
Probably be CPED compliance. We'd have to look to see who the most
The
appropriate.
permits
person
would be with us, right? And so it would make sense to put them in the same place so that when people request records from CPED, they get all of it at once.
Mhm.
If you would like to know that it's RCW 7109-092, which was the conditional release to less restrictive alternative findings that details what they have to produce.
Can you repeat that number again?
It's 7109-092. Conditional release to less restrictive alternative findings.
So long as those are public documents, it should be easy to.
They could be potentially protected. That's why
If it's a
ideally someone
treatment.
would look at it and see whether it is disclosable. It could be HIPAA protected, I don't know.
I could see something.
Restating, your sentence.
Yes,
Again, I
so,
can accurately reflect it.
So in section 2, it states that the treatment provider has presented a specific course of treatment and has agreed to assume responsibility for such treatment and will report progress to the court on a regular basis and will report violations immediately to the court, the prosecutor, the supervising community corrections officer, the superintendent of the special commitment center, right? And so if they're already providing those reports, I don't know whether, if they can't disclose that if that's protected, at least a notice that they had filed one of those things, like some way for people to know, hey, you should dig in more.
Notice. of
Well, and I
violation.
think, I mean, going to the protected, I think the violation is what we're looking.
Yeah,
We aren't looking for their treatment.
exactly. It's specifically when they violate their,
So yeah, just the
Notice of injury.
violation is reported to
at this site,
and Thurston County.
public has a right to know.
I think I would be interested in seeing something that addressed like affirmatively checking compliance or somehow certifying compliance versus a
We have resources.
Like
to
we do
enforce
with
septic systems.
like restaurants,
Yeah,
where Department of Health goes in and inspects a restaurant.
Give them a letter grade, so many blues, so many reds.
Which, again, well, I'm just gonna be the devil's advocate on this one. That increases your FTE for your compliance section. If that is gonna be a requirement, and that's something that we need to take into consideration, because I know the Board of County Commissioners will.
I think probably a lot of us would agree that it's a good use of FTEs.
I don't disagree. I'm just saying that if you've paid any attention to the county budget process and the audit that's just happened with Thurston County, there's a significant budget deficit.
Question.
I think you could also like require inspections that were third party. So that could be an option as well.
Those could all fall under that kind of post compliance aspect. Obviously, with any building permit that they have to submit for a change of use, there will be a review of all septic systems. Same for the food handling situation and all the standards that go with that. As well as any building code changes or modifications that are required with the change of use. And so there will be an initial review, and then any sort of recommendation for the planning commission could be looking at the follow-up and any sort of compliance. And so kind of a catch-all for both of those kind of overarching topics.
And I know I would be interested in staff looking into those compliance options. Mr. Messenger?
It was mentioned earlier about ankle monitoring or other kind of tracking and the lack of cell phone or signal and all that. Is that any sort of building requirement potentially there that has to have signal?
I would say that they would have to have signal if they're gonna have ankle monitors or any type of bracelet on, otherwise,
What does?
what use is it?
I disagree, I don't disagree with this, I just wanna know what we mean by it has to have signal.
Wireless
This
internet.
It's a out in the county problem.
This is already a requirement under RCW that defines this, and we were already stating in here that they must comply with that. So I'm not sure if we need to call that out.
My guess is it would violate the conditions of their release if they, they would get hauled in if they didn't have service to.
Well, it's the facility that needs to have the service, because the people are located at that treatment facility.
I'm not sure that these aren't sexually violent predators. These are one step down. So I don't think that they're ankle braceleted or GPSed or anything like that.
Yeah.
I don't think
I
that's a
don't know.
requirement of LRA.
The facilities are secure in the sense that they are not supposed to be leaving. And so you'd have to reach out to the Department of Corrections to actually confirm like just the overall requirements of residents at those facilities. We are happy to look into that, but I do think that kind of falls outside the realm of zoning and more on the specifications for the Department of Corrections or their still inmates.
And I think, my guess is that they would not be allowed to be housed at a facility that they couldn't be monitored at. Like the Department of Corrections would catch that, but is there a way to confirm that that is a correct assumption?
Per the DSHS website, they have an FAQ where they lay out how residents are monitored. They are uniformly required to be on GPS monitoring. They are also further required to be escorted by an approved monitoring adult to chaperone them during any trips outside their immediate residence. All trips have to be pre-approved, and then they're required to attend treatment, be in contact with their DOC officer and whatnot.
So based on that, they would have to be in a location where a wireless internet was available.
My guess is those GPSs don't necessarily need to be wirelessly connected.
That's the idea
GPSs
behind
don't.
GPS, yeah.
Yeah.
Right, GPSs don't.
That was sort of my like, what do we mean by connection? Because that comes into building materials, that comes into things like that, more than it does, like connection to a specific hub, which is presumably already a thing.
I think it is worth noting that not every structure in Thurston County will be able to accommodate one of these uses, just because simply they can't meet X, Y, or Z. It's if you can check all of the boxes, that's when you can actually qualify. It's not just any structure down the street can apply.
ADU.
Yeah, can apply for this. So they do have a pretty rigorous like selection requirement that they have to meet that the Department of Correction outlines in their contract. And if they violate their contract, they lose their license to operate their facility. So it's in their best interest, I think, to be honest, and meet those requirements.
In our use standards, can we require specific fencing or security measures?
We would need to look into that. I do believe there is a call out for one of the requirements that the facility needs to be secure. And I think there is a fencing component to that, but we can look into that further.
It's worth noting on the DSHS website, they actually describe two different tiers of LRA. There's transitional housing, which has a lot of those restrictions that were in that highlighted copy that one of our commenters provided. And then there's community housing, and that's where the may also offer 24 hours comes in. So I feel like some of these requirements do exist, but only for the community transition facilities, which is that
higher tier that are still operated by DSHS. I wonder if maybe there's been a little confusion between the two tiers and how we've interpreted some of this.
The reason it says may is maybe because we've lumped one where it's required and one where it's not.
Yeah, I like our must better anyways.
Yeah.
It's worth trying.
We're not giving it up.
Did you have it?
So when you guys are done with the recommendations outside of land use, I'd like to step in for a couple of words.
Okay. All right, anything else we wanna?
Just going back to the inspections or sending an FTE to look at some of this compliance stuff. Could that be done with an associated cost so that the provider is paying the cost of that?
recovery?
We would need to look into that.
That could be long-term permit.
We're doing permitting, right? Permitting has fees typically, yes?
There is a fee for the special use with the hearing examiner.
And that is up and going, it's not a recurring fee. And do we have any, is there any way we can make a recommendation on, is all special permitting the same cost or is it different? Okay, never mind.
There's two tiers of special use permitting, and the hearing examiner is one of those categories, and it's a set in stone, but it does fluctuate every year with inflation.
We can't make a recommendation to add an LRA special permitting.
We'd have to look at the fee schedule. It would be an additional step that we'd have to look at establishing.
Could we put a duration on the permit?
Ooh,
I like that.
well, could we put it, I mean, if we went forward with the business license, a specific LRA business license that had to be renewed every year, whose fee was enough to cover the compliance and the inspection.
So let me jump in. So this is what I'm kind of getting at is if the planning commission would like to make recommendations for the staff to look into, have that discussion amongst yourselves and then take a voice vote on if that's a recommendation. And then we can come back to the next work session and do the how and the what conversation.
So
I think that these are really good conversations. What I wanted to say, what I'm jumping in now, is you guys have only seen this 2 times and you've made this much progress. I really appreciate the civil discourse that you're having and how fast you've gone on this. And I know that it's an important topic. Staff can't answer the questions on the fly. If you have recommendations that the planning commission agrees on amongst yourselves, let us load it up. Everything that the planning commission agrees on, let us know what that is. And then let's not go down rabbit holes that the planning commission may not fully agree on. But if you've got those recommendations, we want to hear them. And whether or not we can do it, whether or not it's legal, whether or not it goes against RCW, this is your opportunity to provide a conversation amongst yourselves, not necessarily for staff to answer questions that they don't have the answer to at this time. But we want to hear what the planning commission agrees upon for us to research. And again, thank you. I mean, this has been an amazing and difficult conversation and you've done extremely well and appreciate the dialogue that you've had. Is that helpful in terms of moving this along this evening?
Chair Day, could we motion that we request staff explore permitting fees and timelines for this matter and report back to us?
I think we had, let's get a list. So we've got, like, that's part of our list. We've got.
So going back to what was just said, gravel mining permits do have to be renewed every 5 years. So I think that is something
Precedent.
totally within our
Fees.
power
In the
to
interest of public safety too, we're not trying to be
require-
necessarily punitive.
regular updates to this.
So we've got on our list so far, sorry,
Thank you.
I can't write super fast, but we've got permitting fees, we've got timelines, we've got licensing requirements.
And renewals.
Is there anything else we'd like staff?
Is
to
what I said
explore?
about records of violations, yeah, submitting copies of violations or notifications of violations.
Notice of violations.
Yeah, and the affirmative check and compliance.
Contracted versus uncontracted. One at a time. Affirmative compliance. Contracted versus not.
There was the piece that Commissioner Hanson requested about tying into the fees, what you were just saying, with affirmative compliance, whether or not there could be staff and requirements that the facilities pay for inspections.
Okay. Any other rabbit holes we want to resist until staff will do more research?
I think we've exhausted it.
Okay,
So I think you guys probably have it, but I want to make sure that we have a difference between renewal of licensing and permitting. Two separate questions. Because obviously the licensing is something that we can say, but it's kind of outside of what we do.
Yeah.
I think the permitting is probably well within our reach.
Well, I think the county licensed the facility once it's meets all the requirements. Is that true?
We need to look into it. I do believe it falls more to the state licensing, but we can look into that further.
Looks like DSHS does the licensing. It's like there is now.
Just for clarification, the board, excuse me, the planning commission agrees on all of those recommendations unanimously?
We have
We're
not
about
had,
to ask.
we have not had dissension on anything yet.
Do this as do we want to try to do it as a suite, or do we want to do them line by line?
We try as a suite.
I think it's a suite.
yep, let's run it as a suite. Okay, so we've got on here, we've got permitting fees and licensing fees. We've got timelines for permits and timelines for licensing. We've got, oh, what are they right here? I think this is licensing and renewals.
Timelines.
Permitting, licensing, renewals.
Yep, we have notice of violations. We have affirmative compliance, and we have the contracted versus non-contracted. That is the
And cost
suite
recovery for.
and cost recovery.
The commission also at one point did ask about fencing and security requirements. Would you like me to include that here as well?
Yeah, let's add that in too.
Just
Absolutely.
clarity on that would be nice.
Fencing and security. All right, let's try that slate. If somebody has a motion.
If it's just a request of staff, do we need a motion and a vote, or can we just do a thumbs?
I think it
There's a
helps
request
provide
by
some
the
clarity.
staff for a motion.
It helps justify the use of staff resources if we've moved to do things. if I
Director
understand
Cummings
correctly.
asked for it, so we'll just do it. It helps. All right,
I move that we request staff research the list that has been provided and return to us at a later date with information and recommendations.
Second.
any discussion? Right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? There we go. Okay, thank you so much. I think with that, I think we're ready to tack back to our work session, what is it, 15 on Thurston 2045. Thank you so much. That was a fun rabbit hole delve on some of those. Yeah.
Starting up.
I'm back.
But the question is, are you awake?
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank, Andrew and Anna and Josh for being there so I could be here, learning all about conservation financing tools. I can't wait to share that with the Planning Commission in the future.
Great on brand.
Anyway, we were wrapping up chapter 3 updates. Were there questions before I move on to chapter 2? Chapter 2 has more discussion items that would be great to get to tonight if there's still time. No questions?
Are we in chapter 3 or chapter 2?
Chapter 3.
This,
Remember,
the end of chapter 3, natural resources.
So there are questions before we move to chapter 3. Are there any if we can all cast our minds back to the beginning of this meeting. Do you have any additional questions about chapter 2 before we move into it? I believe this was.
The comments we got on the rural industry, that was under chapter 2 or 3? I've forgotten now.
Chapter 2 land use.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that was something that came up repeatedly, and it was something that we had discussed previously. So I was glad to see it reemphasized.
We'll get to that one. Actually, you said that there's a lot less change in the natural resources land section than in chapter 2, right? I mean, this was the one closer to complete, is it %?
Yep. In terms of policy updates, there weren't as many policy updates being proposed for chapter 3. Having said that, as we move through the long-term agriculture zoning update with the board, there may be additional changes there, but you'll be sure to see them as it gets folded into the full comp plan update.
I had a comment. I had just an observation about the section in chapter 2 on the Olympia Airport area. There's
We're on chapter 3 right now.
oh, we are,
Yeah.
okay. I thought we were still finishing chapter.
So we started chapter 2, we started on 3.
Okay, sorry about that.
There's I think a lot of us have things we want to talk about
Okay.
too.
Gotcha.
That's what's going on.
Start with 3, go to 2.
Yeah, sorry, we started with 3 because it was a lot shorter, and I thought we might be able to squeeze it in before the public hearing. And we were able to.
I do have a comment on chapter 3. I was really impressed with this section on aquaculture. I thought it was great and very relevant to our region. The one thing I was missing though was a map of aquaculture areas in our county. Of course, the saltwater inlets, but might even be something going in some of the lakes, but that would just be a really useful tool to see where there are state aquaculture lands, where there are tribal aquaculture lands, where there's private aquaculture harvest. It'd just be really, I think, really useful.
Yeah, we can look into producing a map. We're still working on all of the maps. And so I'll see what we can pull together for something like that.
Just a quick one when we're in the areas where it's talking about nuisance. And it's the objective A, well, like forest resources, objective A, it says within Thurston County, forest practices consistent with good practices and established prior to surrounding non-forestry activity shall be given protection from nuisance claims. Do we have a definition of good practices?
I don't know off the top of my head. I mean, it's not defined in the comp plan, but I'd have to look in the development code if there's anything specific around good practices. Are you asking because you'd want that called out to be more specific? Like tie it to some kind of certification or standard?
It's so vague, it wouldn't hurt my feelings if there was some sort of document or process or something we could refer to on exactly what good practices mean.
I agree.
Yeah, and even like, that's even more important, like when we look at the aquaculture stuff, like Commissioner Kaiser was talking about, good practices means very different things to very different sides of that argument.
Okay, we can look for an industry standard or, you know, some reference point that has a lot more more information or detail.
My concern with that would be that what we usually refer to them as best management practices.
Yeah.
They're constantly changing.
Mm-hmm.
And so to put them in a document.
Well, like with
this,
like you got a farm plan, that would be, if you stick to your farm plan, I would say that's a good practice. I would say that in an like a gooey duck farm, if they are operating in a way that their permit was originally granted under, then they're in good practice. But I don't want to make those assumptions. If there is a term good practice, that might mean something else or is more nebulous.
Yeah, so you're specifically talking about good practice in the context of it being a reference to their permit.
Or to their immunity from a nuisance claim.
That was my understanding.
Yeah, it might even be more helpful to say standard industry practices, but I mean, we can look at some kind of reference. I understand what the concern is.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Passenger?
Seems related to that. I'm looking at page 3-33, balancing conflicts under resource lands and competing land uses. Talks about in the second paragraph, the policies in the comprehensive plan aim to protect resource industry operations by providing protection against nuisance claims. That's immediately.
Was there a question?
Yeah, that's immediately preceded by, encroaching development, and the impact to both resource industries as well as to agriculture. I don't quite understand the statement. The policies in the comprehensive plan aim to protect resource industry operations by providing protection against nuisance claims. Why does he say that? Why is that our policy? But why are we trying to protect an industry?
Because it's state law.
Right
Right to farm, which includes forestry. So and this is, I guess I'll go because this is one of the things I want to get into. Is Thurston County has a very basic right to farm law. And a lot of counties have adopted others, which I always give the example of Tom DeVries, who used to farm near Little Rock. He got complaints because he had a big farm. We had a lot of cows on a not very big farm. So he trucked cow manure all over the place. A lot of his neighbors complained. He was constantly going and he was getting nuisance complaints. So he would go, and of course, he's following best management practices. So that would get thrown out, but it still cost him a lot of money. And a lot of counties have adopted language, which I think is more for code, but have adopted language that says, one of the things they say is that you are able to recover costs if people are bringing these nuisance complaints against you and you're prevailing. So, and I'll give the example of Skagit County. I think our Right to Farm Act language in Thurston County is a paragraph. There's 3 pages. So
I guess I'm all in favor of protecting right to farm. I'm not in favor of protecting mining operations. And I don't understand why we're so blanket.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they have some of the same rights. I mean, how do I say this? They actually are more likely to probably field claims, nuisance claims. But if we've permitted them and they're acting within their permit, they shouldn't have to defend themselves from a nuisance complaint.
I disagree. I think that we are dealing with and I have this issue also with the agricultural ones, but to a lesser degree, there is a level of punitive response that essentially you would be in something where you're recovering your costs from a complaint. People have a right to complain about uses, even if those uses end up being within county law, because having those complaints is part of how we figure out where our values are going to be. I don't see any reason why we can't separate out mining interests and limiting those from farming interests, because I do think that there's a very big difference in priority in terms of the food that we have versus the resources that we permanently extract out of our ecosystems. I would like to address those separately, and I don't like the idea of bundling them together when we talk about blanket protections. I think that we should be holding farmers to a higher level of protection than we do other industry uses.
I appreciate Commissioner Bartlett's comments. I agree with them. We had a very specific example recently of a mining operation that shall remain nameless, but located in Grand Mount, that literally threatened us in a letter with, we have the rights, we've reached the water table, we have the rights in our permits to continue going deeper. If you don't let us convert this into a residential housing development, we will totally destroy the water table. They have the legal right to do that, but that doesn't mean we should protect them from complaints.
It's like super villain level stuff.
I tend to agree. I think the generative resource production, like farming, and the extractive resource, that distinction should be clear. To be clear, some forms of farming could be extractive if it's done in a really bad way. I don't want to say that all farming is necessarily good and virtuous by the nature of its growing food, but yeah, I do think there's a good distinction there.
Yeah, and I think that also actually gives us a little bit of a tool to talk about what is extractive, like is cutting down an old growth forest extractive, or is it
Generative.
Regenerative, because the thing that you're regenerating isn't an old growth forest.
Yeah. You're using a lot of carbon capacity there.
And stored water, we're learning.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Chair.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna play the devil's advocate here for a minute, but and not to say that anybody's opinion is wrong or anything else. And not that I have a different opinion, but the problem is funding, budget, resources. This county has limited means to garner tax dollars from unincorporated Thurston County industries like agriculture and mining and forestry, et cetera. And a lot of those resources, they don't get a whole lot from because of the nature of that resource. And we've all had this conversation before in here about UGAs and cities incorporating certain portions of the city and not others because it's more economically beneficial to them to incorporate this portion of the UGA versus this portion of the UGA. Well, all that detracts from the county's ability to fund the county and all the services that the entire county is provided. Law and Justice Center or the court system, which the entire county benefits from, is really only paid for by unincorporated Thurston County tax dollars right now, because the larger Thurston County, to include our incorporated cities, has not voted to provide the bond or funding to make those facilities better, to renovate them, to bring them up to standard, and we're here because of that problem. So with limited resources that we have, and we don't have a lot of mining operations in Thurston County, quite frankly.
For now.
Right, we have two of the larger aquaculture operations in Thurston County, which provides a lot of benefit to Thurston County, which Commissioner Kaiser has legitimately indicated that there's a lot in here about the aquaculture, and we had a lot of conversation about aquaculture when we did the Shoreline Master Program. But forestry, I mean, there's a lot of things dealing with forestry we don't have any control over because it's run by the state, okay? The huge amount of Thurston County forestry is controlled by state. Thurston County has nothing to do with it. We have very little benefit from it, except for the people that live within the county that work those industries. So I think we need to be very careful when we talk about restricting more or taking away, protecting the resources of even mining operations. I think we need to be very careful when we do that. And I don't like to be behind a gravel truck, Holroyd gravel company, because I take the Nisqually Road all the time, and I've had my window smashed several times by their trucks. But I'll tell you that if you follow that truck to where it's going and you get the license number and you go back to Holroyd, they'll pay for your window replacement. Okay. So they are responsible, they are responsive, they understand that they're dealing with a community and stuff, but I just want to be careful when we talk about putting more restrictions on or not providing protections to some of the resources that our county needs to survive as a county and provide the other benefits that everybody in the county enjoys. I mean, that's my comment. I understand everybody's perspective on it, but I also have been really watching the budget very closely in this county, and it is a huge issue. And that budget is not getting better because of what's happening with our incorporated cities in Thurston County primarily. And we've all had that discussion when we come up with these joint plans that we work with.
And Ashley, we'll fit you in a second here, but I think the conversation we had earlier about defining the practices that kind of give you essentially immunity from nuisance claims could be really important here. So we could say which practices we're covering and like to the exclusion of, you know, water table hostage holding. So, but Ashley, go ahead.
I just wanted to clarify that currently we only have right to farm and forestry, and that satisfies compliance with state law. So if that isn't removed, I'm having trouble with just one screen opening up multiple things to look, but if we just need to clarify that in the policy language of the comp plan, that's something that can easily be done.
I move to do so.
Second.
What are we moving to do?
Move that in page 3-33, second paragraph under part A, that we change the policies in the comprehensive plan aim to protect resource industry operations. Change that terminology to those that are protected by state law, which I believe she mentioned are agriculture and forestry.
Yes.
Agreed.
Was that a motion?
Yeah.
And I seconded.
All right, any discussion? Does the devil have an opinion? Mrs. Advocate want to speak on this behalf?
I just want to make sure everybody understands.
Okay, yeah, no, I get it.
We've got a huge budget problem here. We need to recognize that when we start doing policy and making recommendations to change things.
Putting the thumb on the scale for certain industries. All right.
I guess my concern is that I think if even when you include gravel mines, if they're operating within their permit, they should also be protected from nuisance claims through whatever process we have. I mean, you know, if I go and somebody's going and dumping something that they're not supposed to somewhere, that's a violation, not a nuisance. If either the example you get most from farms, either manure or noise from cattle or tractors or dust from operations, that is a nuisance, not a violation. Just like, you know, gravel mine, I know some gravel mines have dust control in their permit. So if and I think the big one we had before was noise. If they're staying within their parameters, then I don't think you should be able to consistently go and file nuisance complaints against them.
I have no love lost for gravel mines, but I think we'd get the best juice for the squeeze in looking more at the mineral extraction code than we would by feeding them up with nuisance claims.
You're not the ones doing this, but it's,
We're encouraging nuisance claims. I'm saying we don't want to say that our county policies are designed to protect them from them.
This is a narrative statement that we're changing.
Yeah, some of the downstream effects though, we saw this when we were going after recycled asphalt, in that nobody really liked the idea of more asphalt processing. But if we ran it off, all that would happen is we'd get more asphalt coming in from Pierce County up and down our roads. And when you, on the whole, it was more, there's a larger negative environmental impact by running off those companies than it was by letting them to operate here, because we're still going to consume mineral extracted products. We're still going to consume them. So where are they going to come from? And if they gotta be trucked in from out of county, that doesn't help us any more than if we had shorter trips for those trucks. So I would prefer to see us tighten up things on the mineral extraction code. And I'm not sure how to punish a company that threatens the county with destroying our water table because we didn't let them build houses. I'm not sure how to do that. I like that idea, but I don't know how to do that. But I think that the mineral extraction code is really where we need to put our focus on if we want to tighten things up there instead of by allowing more and more nuisance claims against them.
I see this as a volcano dose situation. I think that we can allow people to use the tools that are available to them to protect the quality of their lived environment from these things, while also going into the resource extraction and the mineral extraction sections and being very clear about that. So I don't like the idea of us as a county discouraging people from using tools of civic participation that are available to them. That's where I'm sitting with this.
That's a fair point.
There's a motion on the floor, right? Motion on the table.
It's been seconded.
And it's been seconded, and we are now discussing it.
Are we done discussing and ready to vote?
Just to clarify, this changes it to say state protected activities, right? Which are farming and forestry.
Those are protected by state law.
Those protected by state law. And as part of continue the discussion, we should also notice that aquaculture is not protected. It is a what do they call it? A preferred use. But a preferred use is not a protection. So this would then open up aquaculture to nuisance claims.
I totally disagree. This is nothing about opening up. This is simply stating.
Removing an exemption.
Policies to protect them from.
This goes back into the stuff about teeth that we talk about all the time. Like, I mean, we're making a recommendation on what is a recommendation here. Like, they are as open as they have ever been. Doesn't change them.
Can we clarify that aquaculture isn't covered under agriculture? Because I know in other circumstances it is.
Yeah.
Like employment law is.
Agriculture.
The aquaculture and agriculture are two different sections within chapter 3.
But under state law, that's what we're, because that's what we're citing here, right? State law?
Yeah.
Does state law distinguish the two?
I think it does in some cases and not in others, because a lot of aquaculture is essentially controlled harvesting of a wild resource. So it ends up
Aquaculture.
A lot of it's seeded too.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's like it's complicated.
Are this aquaculture prone to these kind of complaints?
Very much so, very much so. Yeah.
I'll do deference to Commissioner Kaiser and her love of aquaculture. I have serious concerns about aquaculture, and it's both the operations that have failed horribly here with salmon net pens and run by out-of-state conglomerates that have shown very distinct disinterest in our environmental well-being, as well as our local mafia known as the Shelton operated shellfish company. There's a lot of waterfront property owners who have tried to create coalitions and try to create groups to provide any protection against negative impacts that come from aquaculture, and have run into a wide array of roadblocks and inability to fight back. And I don't think we need to lessen their ability to take advantage of.
Commissioner Day, I have a request.
Go ahead.
I would ask that Mr. Pestinger's last statement be removed from the record. He referred to people in this local area as mafia, and actually at one point called me out for saying that I thought something was dishonest.
So I'm not sure that we can strike it from the record, but I think we can ask that we use
I hope I said mafia-like, but maybe
more decorous things moving forward.
So heard.
Just a follow up on that, which is just to bring this back to the conversation we had around LRAs, which is where we discussed the fact that the profit motive inherently like disincentivizes honest behavior we discussed it in the context of the LRAs. I mean, that's obviously true throughout the board. So we had said then that one of our goals here was to make sure to use the power that we have. One of the reasons we have that power is to keep people honest around things that they're making money with. This is precisely what this is about. This is like nuisance claims are one of the tools that people use to protect themselves against profit-making entities.
My only comment to that was, I mean, spending 11 years working on the Shoreline Master Program, aquaculture is probably one of the most regulated industries in Puget Sound, quite frankly, okay? Yeah, they make mistakes and they have errors, but they have oversight from feds, the state, and the county. And they have to abide by all those regulations. And when they have a violation, they get penalized heavily for it. I mean, I'm not defending them, okay? I'm just saying that is, spending 11 years working that, I mean, Commissioner Casino was there with me too. And I think, Joel, you were on there for a while at the end of it. And I know Miss Scott Nelson was.
So, and I think there's like, all of these things are a balance, because I think we're trying to do is, I mean, the flip side of that is that a lot of these available avenues are used essentially for NIMBYism. And we've seen that to great effect across the board as well. So I think what we're really trying to do is balance and make sure that people do have an opportunity. But Ashley has her hand up in the Zoom world. Go ahead.
Sorry. I did want to reassure the Planning Commission or bring to light that the board has directed, well, they'll be making a decision soon about whether to create the Water Resources Advisory Board. And that board's biggest task or two biggest tasks will be looking at aquaculture, as well as putting together the monitoring plan for the Shoreline Master Program. So if any of the planning commissioners would like to continue the conversation around aquaculture, they'd be more than welcome to attend those.
I'd like to remind the chair that there is still a motion on the floor.
Yes. So,
which I don't imagine would be the best thing for a voice vote. I want to call that.
Yep, I think we are probably looking at a roll call vote for this one.
And we reiterate.
Yeah, can we? It was to change, where was the language, Mr.?
On page 3-33.
Section 7, part A, second paragraph. Opening sentence, the policies in the comprehensive plan aim to protect resource industry operations. Change resource industry operations to state protected.
All right. Is that clear for folks? All right, and we'll go ahead and call the roll.
Commissioner Bartlett,
Yes.
Commissioner Baumgartner,
Aye.
Commissioner Casino,
Nay.
Commissioner Fishburne,
Aye.
Commissioner Halverson,
Nay.
Commissioner Kaiser. Aye. Commissioner Nelson,
Nay.
Commissioner Pessinger,
Aye.
Vice Chair Hansen,
Nay.
Chair Day.
I will abstain.
Four.
Oh,
Yeah, you're the tie-breaking vote.
Oh, I'm a tiebreaker. Oh, I thought it was not a tiebreaker.
That's why you're last to vote.
Dang it, I know, and that's why I didn't want to vote, because it was close. But, okay, I'm an aye. Me trying to remain neutral, just make it worse.
I think that maybe the first time since I've been here, I've put it back close.
Yeah. All right.
Are we ready to go to land use?
Oh, hold on for a second. We have 10 commissioners. How did we have a 9 vote?
It was already 5-4.
Let's see, originally.
There's 3, those 2. It was already
Oh,
funded for.
was it
It
already
was
5-4?
it was 5 yay, 4 nay, 1 abstain.
Oh, there was
Oh.
an who abstained?
I was abstaining.
Chair
That
So I was
was-
trying to
Change
remain
to an
neutral.
aye. So technically it's
Okay.
6-4.
Yeah.
Would have passed it.
You'd still have to vote because 5-4 would fail.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
has to be a preponderance,
Oh, okay.
A majority.
majority, sorry.
Mhm. It was a preponderance. I could have just, go ahead.
I have a question, Ashley, of on page 3-39. Under objective C, or I'm sorry, objective B. Part 3 talks about encourage education of the value of prairie land for management and ecological and nutritional food sources, resources. New reserves under the county HCP conservation land system will include tribal harvest of camas where feasible. Is one thing that a previous commissioner mentioned a few times was that there was some history of managing the lands and controlled burns. Is that included in this to some degree, or is there any other part where that's covered?
Burns would be included in the site management plans for the prairies. This was language specifically recommended by the tribes that we've been meeting monthly with, and specifically the Squaxin tribe.
I love that. I support that. I'm asking, in many cases, controlled burns are not legal, not allowable under different codes, and they've become a newer thing that has become more considered wise and useful. Is there anything we need to do to allow for, make sure there's not code prohibiting controlled burns?
No, I mean, we're planning to do controlled burns. This is part of the HCP. So in the habitat conservation plan, it calls out controlled burns as one of the practices, best management practices for prairie restoration.
Okay, thank you.
All right, anything else on chapter 3 before we go back to Commissioner Bartlett?
Yes, so on 345, line 3, some mature forest lands should be purchased in the metropolitan fringe areas of the county for their historic and aesthetic values for parks and other recreational uses, unless they are designated as forest lands of long-term commercial significance. We had discussed previously that we have other interests for preserving forests beyond that limited scope. Specifically for carbon and water, like carbon, like watershed and carbon sequestration, as well as like conservation itself, which is not actually mentioned in there. I would encourage the inclusion of those additional reasons for us to want to preserve our forests.
So they were referenced in chapter 9. Would it be useful to refer to that section of chapter 9? We had discussions about duplicating or where we should house those new forestry related policies, and we thought they were better fit in chapter 9, but if you think they're better fit in chapter 3, or if there just needs to be a crosswalk, we can do that.
No, that's fine. I would like a little bit of a reference to chapter 3 there, but I think that's okay as long as they're still there. I got a little worried that they weren't.
No.
Okay, anything else on chapter 3? We move to chapter 2. Good.
I think,
Did you have
time
some?
check?
Yeah,
It's 9 o'clock.
we were running pretty behind.
9:08, sorry.
Maybe we don't have time to go through chapter 2.
Okay,
I want to give that its full due too.
Exactly.
Do we want to move or do we just want to go for it? Because, I still got to have my bloodstream.
You're up till 1 no matter what.
Yeah, at this point, yeah.
okay, do we have a general consensus whether or not we want to?
Do you have some input on this? Ashley?
Let's consider our staff.
Yeah, how you feeling, Ashley? Do we want to power through?
Oh, well, I'm wondering if there seems to be a few decision points it would be really helpful to get commissioner feedback on. And knowing that this chapter is only baked at about 60%,
Okay.
I'm happy to sort of skip over like most of the slides and go to those discussion items, if that sounds good to you. And I think they reflect the public comment you've been hearing as well.
I love that.
Okay.
Sense.
That
And we'll
sounds like
see
a
this
great
again,
proposal.
right? When it gets closer to.
And this won't be our last time to see this, Ashley?
No, not at all. Because housing is so closely intertwined with this, that this is where we're getting into chapters that are like, until we get housing done or climate done, we can only bring them along so far. So there's a number of changes. I'll just highlight them really quickly. Got the military compatibility updates. We've got some updates to the neighborhood commercial designation criteria as a follow-up to Planning Commission conversations last year. But then I think the big ones that you've been hearing about are related to the rural resource industrial designation criteria. And specifically, there have been public comments around clarifying what the county's intention is with rural resource industrial designations. And of course, the implementing zoning, and sort of the relationship to that designation, and available lands, available industrial lands, in the cities and or UGAs. And yeah, so just kind of throwing it out there. So rural resource industrial is probably the first decision point or discussion item for the Planning Commission. There were some updates already incorporated, but then there were questions about whether we should do additional updates. And I'm looking for the exact slide. It's so tiny on my screen. Let me see here.
Is it the clarified rural resource industrial purpose one?
No, it's slide 17, please.
Is that going forward?
Yeah, so we've been getting a lot of public comment about this, related to all of the requests in the last few years that the counties received to redesignate and rezone lands from, rural resource residential to rural resource industrial. And the county completed an industrial land study, but unfortunately updates to chapter 9, the economic chapter, aren't part of the comp plan update. They weren't funded. So there's obviously things that live within the land use chapter, but trying to gauge where the Planning Commission would like to go with the updates to chapter 2 related to rural resource industrial, without opening up the whole chapter 9 economic discussion.
Would this be where you're looking for discussion or comments about recommendation on how to grow the or not grow the rural area as opposed to the urban growth area?
Yeah, so the specific public comments were in regards to encouraging the clustering of industrial uses. So you don't necessarily have a spot zone of industrial, that it's disconnected from other industrial uses. And I'd say that's a fairly common policy that a lot of cities and or counties adopt, given infrastructure considerations. The next one was limiting non-resource uses in rural resource industrial. Right now, warehouse uses are allowed with siting requirements, and also considering whether any new rural resource industrial land should be designated if there's industrial land still available in the cities or UGAs.
I know I personally definitely agree strongly with these comments, specifically around limiting non-resource uses in rural resource areas if there is urban land available. I think that has a lot of support from what I've been seeing from our constituents, and it's something that fits with our discussions previously about wanting to retain the rural character of those areas and retain those areas for agriculture when industrial uses are otherwise going to outprice them. If we don't limit them, I suspect that we're just going to end up getting that eaten away over time.
I'd echo Commissioner Bartlett's sentiment and bring to people's attention, if they hadn't noticed, Amazon is closing one of its large distribution centers in Tequila. That big paved lot is going to sit empty now, and almost 200 people are going to lose their job, which wasn't even the only large warehouse that they're closing this week. We're in a large one in California, which will put another 300 people out of work. I've discussed previously, these are not good jobs. They don't fit the rural character of the area. That land could be used in better ways that are better fit the intent, I think, of when, I mean, I don't imagine when the rural resource industry zoning standard was created that warehousing was a heavy use of them. And so I think it makes sense to re-examine whether that makes sense there, as I don't think it does belong there.
So are you asking for some kind of formal direction for where to go on these? Ashley, would you like a straw poll or a vote from us?
I think that would be good because it kind of depending on where the planning commission would like staff to go, it could be integrated throughout the chapter, and so not just like one policy change, and so it would be helpful to get feedback. Whether that's straw poll, I don't think it has to be formal motion, but you know, a discussion on the record with a straw poll. And just so you are aware, it could potentially impact land use requests that are currently on the docket. I just want to be fully transparent.
It seems to me like the second bullet sort of excludes the first. So maybe we temperature check the second bullet and then the third, then the first one, if that makes sense. Keeping in mind that it could affect future land use requests. Does that make sense?
When you say first and second bullet, can you
consider new policy that limits non-resource use versus considering policy to encourage clustering of industrial uses?
One is saying they're okay, but stick them together, which I think at least the comments sort of said when you cluster those things, you're just encouraging development in that area that's out of character because you're concentrating that out of character, whatever.
So do we want to maybe take that second sub bullet first?
That's what I was saying, yeah.
I personally would be in favor of removing the first sub-bullet. Encourage clustering of industrial uses in rural area. I think that goes against the intent of a lot of the public comment that we saw about preserving rural character and agricultural lands.
Yeah, so to be clear, just to reiterate, approving bullet point 2 negates bullet point 1. So that would be removing that.
Unless you're trying to cluster rural resource industrial as well. So I think
so exclude warehouses and still cluster.
So I mean, it could be technically separate questions.
That's really good.
I think the clustering, the idea behind industrial clustering is whether it is, well, in the case of rural resource industrial, if it's natural resource based industrial uses, keeping them closer together versus having them spread out all over the county.
Well, isn't it?
If you're a farm, are you going to one location, let's say, to get your processing done, or are you having to go to multiple locations all over the county? I understand the rural aesthetic piece. I was just wanting to give you kind of the thought behind why you would cluster certain uses together. It's usually for the ease of the user of those uses. In this case, it'd be farm, forestry, whatnot.
Actually, to clarify with that sub-bullet 1, you're saying it's clustering of natural resource industrial uses?
Yeah, so the rural resource industrial is mostly natural resource based industrial uses. And then there's like a subset where warehousing is allowed subject to siting criteria. So whether it's close to I-5, whether it has access to railroads. So I think the clustering is of, you know, whether you consider sub-bullet 2 or not, would you want to cluster your natural resource based industrial uses together?
I guess I would recommend that we add clustering of natural resource industrial uses. Right now, it just says clustering of industrial uses, and I inferred from that we meant things like warehousing, fabrication.
Same.
I think we'd get there just by leaving the language the way it is. Well, approving, speaking in favor of the second one and then the first one. You'd speak in favor of both of them. Yeah, yeah. I still think it makes sense to call out that we're not talking about, to Commissioner Fishburne's point.
So here, I think, so if we say we only want natural resource industrial in rural areas, we could also say that we want that clustered. So that's the.
And by accepting both of those, that's exactly what we're doing.
Exactly. If we accept both of those, that's exactly what we do. I think my question would be, is there anybody who wants to take them separately because they don't agree with one or the other and they want that on record?
I still think that we should amend the first one to say natural, because I don't want this later to be interpreted as we like both ideas without the context of because two, then one.
I think
what if we deleted the first one and on the second one say, and cluster it where possible?
I like that.
And encourage clustering.
And encourage clustering. I think I would also want to ask our one resident potential user of these resources, if, you know, from your perspective, does it make sense to have them clustered or spread out? Would you want to make one trip, or do you want them in certain places?
To me personally, I don't think it matters because right now, most of what I do, I have to go to Chehalis. So, and I mean, from a right now perspective, I don't know about encouraging clustering because it would just be nice to have it. And so if we're trying to push it all into the same area, and it's gonna, you know, that's gonna vary. You know, I live right near the freeway, right just south of Tumwater. You know, my parents live almost the geographic center of the county. So we're gonna have different opinions on where it should be clustered than somebody that lives in Nisqually. Or somebody in Yelm, or somebody in Rochester. Well, they're probably gonna, I mean, really what we're looking at is clustering is probably gonna be in my area. Cause there's already some industrial area in Maytown, or it's gonna go to Grand Mouse, because there's already industrial there.
So I think that's the difference between clustering and centralizing. We're not saying like you have to go to the commissariats, like industrial supply center that we have demanded be hovering 15 feet above the Olympia Capitol. But we are saying that like where possible, if you're within this area, like we're encouraging like the similar use, similar processing things to be closer to each other so that there is a proximity at least of a multiplicity of uses within that for that purpose.
Okay.
I'd like a little more clarity on what's considered rural resource industrial. Just to understand, like clean energy generation facilities. Is a solar farm a rural resource industrial?
Methane capture.
Biomass energy generation.
What is currently written to really identify like the three primary natural resources? We have forestry, we have mineral, and then there's it's ag related. Those are the primary core uses for natural resources.
I consider sunlight a natural resource.
Yeah, they are.
Okay, so I'm gonna propose that we take these two questions together. And would somebody want to make a motion?
Can we put the If
you make the motion, you can.
Phrasing. Okay, I actually like to Commissioner Pestinger's suggestion to make them as a single bullet. So I'm proposing that we consider new policy that limits non-resource uses in RRI in rural areas if urban land is available and encourage clustering.
I second that.
All right. Okay,
I think that was very succinctly worded.
sorry. Any discussion before we
been a
put it
long
to a vote?
Yeah.
I feel like the horse is, the proverbial horse has gotten the stick. All in favor?
Being beaten right now.
Aye.
Aye.
Any nays?
I'm nay on that.
Okay. And I'll note that we have an abstention, at least one.
Yeah, yeah, I'm not, cause it's encouraging clustering of industrial uses. You know, it's just so vague, as someone has already pointed out. I just don't, it doesn't really define it to nail it down, to provide any clarity.
Yeah.
Is that a second motion to nail it down and provide some clarity?
It could be, I just don't like the way it's worded personally.
I just will note that we are editing a PowerPoint, like
Yeah.
discussion point rather than an actual
Yes.
policy document at this point.
Yep.
I do think that you're right about what we need to have in this for the actual discussion we have for the actual policy that we will be presumably discussing.
And Ashley, do you feel like you have the direction you need?
Yeah, it was basically whether to focus on that urban availability of land as a limiting factor, and whether clustering was something that should be a consideration.
And I think you've heard enough probably questions about what we consider rural resource industrial to probably have some clarity. All right.
Yeah, and I think that this is an area where we are looking forward to being able to update the economic chapter and take a fresh look at those industrial zoning districts. And so more to come for the Planning Commission to consider.
Okay. Did you have additional questions you had for us?
I wanted to make sure that I addressed the comments on the UGA swap. So we have put in some proposed language to reflect the changes in state law. Parallel to the comp plan update is Thurston Regional Planning Council's consideration of updates to the countywide planning policies to also address those changes in state law. So I just want the Planning Commission to know that we realize it's interjurisdictional, that we're looking to Thurston Regional Planning Council and their board and the update to the countywide planning policies to provide that, more guidance. And that we'll also be looking at King County and Pierce County, I have heard, are in the process of considering UGA swaps and or UGA swap policies. So we'll also be conferring with them since this is also new.
I was actually hoping to add one more thing at the end of this, and this is kind of a testament to the direction of the Planning Commission. We did hear you regarding kind of the vague statements, and we have begun shifting the policies to be more actionable statements. And so you'll begin to see those as we work our way through all the sections.
I did notice and appreciate that behind this one.
I appreciated the switch to active voice where possible.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So anything else on
Two.
And I assume we're okay to move on?
We need to move on.
Okay, all right, we are good to move on.
Who's coming back?
Yep, who's coming back? Is there anything for item number 8, general update?
Just that next week we will be hosting 2 community forums, one at the Yelm Community Center and then the Tenino Quarry Community Center on June 13th and 15th. More information can be found in the agenda.
Okay. Thank you. Moving on to staff update. Is there any staff update for us?
Oh, I just wanted to let you know that we do have an open position, backfilling our recently promoted senior engagement leader. We've got an education and outreach specialist position open. So if you know anyone that wants to join our team and loves chatting with people and engaging the community in our planning processes, please send them our way.
Thank you, Ashley. Moving on to calendar with agenda items. We've got two upcoming meetings here, the 26th and the 10th. Is anybody gonna be not available for those meetings?
I'm not here the 26th.
Okay. That will be planned then. Anybody else? Looks like we'll have some good turnout. Okay, well, if that changes, let myself or Tasha know. Moving on to good of the order. Do you have any good of the order?
Just to be clear, we're definitely not meeting on the 19th. That's from Juneteenth.
I don't see one on there.
That's correct.
Speaking of that, item number 3 under the upcoming engagement opportunities. I think there's a typo in that date, Juneteenth date.
No, so the actual event takes place on the Saturday.
Oh.
Before the event and or if Juneteenth were to fall on a Saturday, it's kind of how their website describes it.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying. That's a very good clarification. All right, go to the order. Commissioner Castillo.
Yeah, I just wanted to report back that I went and listened to the oral arguments at the Supreme Court this last Thursday, and there's two interesting cases that they were doing there. The first one was about administrative procedures and just water discharges from wastewater treatment plant. It was kind of interesting, but the more important one to us is a case that involved what a planning commissioner is. And the big question on before them was, is a planning commissioner an officer or is it a position? Is it an office or a position? And that has real impacts for people like us that are on planning commissions are often engaged in other public or other activities. And sometimes there can be conflicts between office holders. So they are going to be deciding whether or not planning commissioners are officers or if we are office holders. In that particular example, there was a planning commissioner from Jefferson County who is also on the Washington State Fish and Wildlife Commission. And the Washington State Fish and Wildlife Commission has a prohibition about having somebody on there that it holds another office. So obviously we haven't heard the decision from the Supreme Court yet, but it might impact some of us if we do other things. And they're going to affirm or redesign a trust on what constitutes an officer.
Fascinating. We will wait.
Yeah.
Okay, any other good of the order?
Thank you, Ashley.
Having no other business, this meeting is adjourned. Thanks for your patience, folks.
Thank you, audience members who stuck through that very long meeting. I appreciate your endurance.